This took place when I was renting a 2-bedroom apartment. So I shared the place with a roommate named Caleb, and we had lived together for roughly 8 months by this point without any prior issues. The apartment was an older, converted building with narrow hallways and uneven door frames, which is relevant to how the sound carried at night in this place, but I woke up at around maybe 2 or 2:30 in the morning at some stage. There was no noise that I recall triggering it, no dream that carried over or anything like that. I was alert almost immediately, which stood out to me because I usually take several seconds to sort of orient myself after waking up. My bed faced a recessed wardrobe area with a sliding door that was usually kept partially open. And when I sat up, I noticed a person standing inside of that empty space, positioned sideways as if reaching or searching for something. The individual was very short with a large head and was wearing some sort of a jumpsuit or something. Based on what I was seeing, at first I thought it might have been Caleb sort of crouched down or something. But we owned similar clothing and the lighting conditions were low but sufficient to make out a silhouette clearly. And because of that assumption, my initial reaction was neutral rather than fearful, and I thought that he may have come into my room by mistake or was looking for something that he had misplaced or whatever. I spoke his name once, then again more loudly when there was no response. The person stopped moving after the second time that I spoke though, and then they turned to face me. At that point, the situation shifted from confusing to just threatening. The facial features aligned generally with my roommates, but there were like inconsistencies that I could immediately articulate. Most notably was the size of the person, and the size of the head as well. The gaze didn't track me in a normal way as well, and it felt sort of static as if the face was present without active attention behind it. What I mean is that the face was Caleb's, but the body was strange. It was as if he had shrunk by like 3 feet, and now had a really large head and a really skinny body. There was no verbal response, and after several seconds, the figure stepped backward, exited the room, and moved down the hallway toward the living room. The movement was steady and unhurried and smooth in a way that is hard to explain. I didn't follow, though. I remained seated, listening for additional sounds, such as the front door opening or footsteps returning, but I didn't hear anything. I stayed awake for the remainder of the night after that. I checked the apartment before leaving for work in the morning. Nothing appeared disturbed, and the front door was locked. Later that day, I asked Caleb why he had come into my room during the night, and he looked genuinely confused and told me that he apparently had not even been home that night. You see, he had stayed overnight at his partner's apartment across town and had arrived back mid-morning after I had already left. At that point, I considered several explanations. Maybe I was just hallucinating, or maybe it was some sort of sleep paralysis or something. Another possibility was that it was an intruder who happened to resemble my roommate and exited quietly, though there were no signs of forced entry or missing items or anything. Well, several weeks later, the building management notified tenants that a former resident had been accessing units using an old master key that had not been properly accounted for during renovations. No direct connection was made to my apartment, but the timing aligned closely enough to offer a plausible explanation, I suppose. Although that really doesn't explain the person's dimensions and just how weird they looked. So my partner and I took a week away to a family-owned house in Spain. It's in a very small sort of agricultural village there, and we'd been dating only a few months at this stage. He was dealing with sustained pressure at work, and I was handling estate and legal matters following a recent death in my immediate family. The purpose of the trip was not leisure in the usual sense. Continuing our obligations remotely while changing environment really was what it was all about. The village is sparsely populated outside of festival season. During the summer, many residents are absent, and the house faces a central square used primarily for events and children's play. The square contains an old municipal building, basic playground equipment, and an open paved area. Behind it, separated by a shallow slope, is a utility enclosure housing electrical infrastructure for the square's lighting, bordered by unmanaged trees and low-growth agricultural land as well. This layout matters because of sightlines and lighting conditions at night. So on our second evening, shortly before midnight, we left the house to sit in the square and to get some fresh air. This was not unusual locally, and there was no activity or noise in the area. We initially used the swings near the center of the square, then moved toward a secondary play structure closer to the municipal building. One of the lights in that section was not functioning, leaving the area dim but not fully dark. I was seated facing toward the utility structure and trees. My partner was facing toward the houses, and at one point I noticed a porch light at a neighboring house turn off, and I registered this only as an indication that no one else was outside at this point. Now, within seconds of that, I experienced a sudden physical response to something. Increased heart rate, I felt a bit dizzy, and a strong impulse to just leave the area. Mind you, there was nothing in the area that should have really caused it. No sound preceded it, and I didn't see anything. I didn't speak immediately, but my partner noticed my posture change and made eye contact. He later described experiencing the same reaction independently. Well, we continued talking briefly without addressing it directly, but the sense of urgency increased rather than faded. The perceived source of the discomfort was consistently located behind the municipal building, near the tree line adjacent to the electrical structure. We didn't observe movement, hear footsteps, or see light or anything. What was noticeable, though, was the absence of ambient noise all of a sudden. Insects and wind had been audible earlier, and they were just no longer there anymore. In fact, it was as if the whole world had gone silent all of a sudden. We exited the playground using the route that kept us facing the open street rather than the trees. We walked at a controlled pace and didn't run. I continued checking behind us until we reached the road. There was no pursuit, sound, or visual confirmation of any other people there. But once inside of the house, we discussed the experience. Our descriptions aligned in timing, intensity, and perceived direction. Neither of us had seen anything identifiable. The lack of clear cause made the experience more difficult to contextualize as well. Not more dramatic or anything, but it was around then that we noticed the time. It was now 5 o'clock in the morning, and the sun was about to rise. But that made no sense at all. I mean, we went down there at like midnight, and we'd been there for maybe 20 minutes maximum. So where had all that time gone? Well, the following day, we attempted to resume normal activities. That evening, we drove to a nearby mountain town for dinner and returned after about 3 hours. When we arrived, I exited the car to open the garage gate, and at the base of the driveway incline, directly in front of the entrance, there was a dead cat positioned across a drainage channel. There was no visible injury consistent with a vehicle strike, and no blood, broken limbs, or skid marks or anything. My partner, who had prior experience in rural areas, noted that the body condition suggested that the animal had not died at that location, and that death had probably occurred earlier. I didn't touch it. We entered the house immediately and secured the doors. The cat remained in the same position until the following night as well, after which it was just gone. We didn't see who removed it, or if maybe a wild animal had taken it or something, but no further incidences occurred during that stay or on subsequent visits. The playground has not produced the same reaction since then, and I have not experienced any missing time apart from that time. I have spoken to a couple of people before about this who have suggested maybe abductions or something, like alien abductions, but I don't know about any of that stuff, and I've never seen anything like that, so I don't know. If you have any idea as to what this could have been, then I would love to hear from you guys because, really, I'm completely stumped. I'm not presenting this as a paranormal claim, but as a series of repeated perceptions that have continued long enough to be difficult to ignore anymore. I am aware that stress, lighting, and expectation can all influence perception, and I do factor that in when describing what happened. These experiences began around 2015, when I was living in a single-story rental house in regional Victoria, Australia. I was a teenager at the time. I had no diagnosed mental health conditions, no history of hallucinations, and no substance use either. The house itself was ordinary enough and relatively quiet, located on a residential street with little night traffic. I've always been comfortable moving around the house in low light. I often walk through rooms without turning lights on, especially at night. During those periods, though, I began noticing brief visual disturbances that appeared only in my peripheral vision. These were not clear figures, but sort of like shapes that suggested a human outline positioned in doorways, corners, or partially obscured spaces, such as like beneath the kitchen counter. When I turned my head to look directly, nothing was ever there, though. At first, I dismissed this as a normal visual processing issue. Peripheral vision is unreliable at best, and the brain fills in gaps, right? However, the timing and the repetition stood out to me the most. These impressions occurred almost exclusively at night and only ever inside of the house. They didn't happen outdoors or in other buildings. There was one earlier incident too when I was younger that differed from the others in clarity. This happened around 2011, while I was sitting on the floor watching television in the living room during the afternoon. So, I saw a person standing several feet in front of me, fully within my direct line of sight. The figure appeared female, approximately my height at the time, and her hair covered most of her face. The lighting made it difficult to determine whether she was standing in shadow or whether her appearance was just uniformly dark, but her clothing looked minimal and casual. Not costume-like or anything, but just minimal. She didn't move or speak, and I looked at her for several seconds, before looking away, that is, and when I looked back, she was gone. That was the only time that I did see anything with that level of clarity. It never did repeat, and I didn't tell anyone about it. In the years afterward, the experiences returned to being brief, unclear, and peripheral again. Another incident, though, occurred late one night when I walked into the kitchen to get some food. The room was dark, and when I switched on the overhead light, I saw a dark human-shaped outline standing in the doorway that connected the kitchen to a bedroom. The shape appeared oriented toward the television in the adjacent room and not toward me. As soon as the light came on, the shape turned its head in my direction and then was no longer visible. There was no gradual change or movement out of view. It was literally like it just blinked out of existence. Nobody else was present, and there were no objects positioned in a way that could have caused a shadow matching that shape. I didn't feel panic so much as a confusion, I guess, and also a heightened alertness. In addition to visual experiences, though, there have been occasional auditory ones too. Like one night while lying in bed in complete silence, I heard a low vocal sound that resembled a strained or uneven human voice. It lasted several seconds and didn't repeat. I stayed still and did not look around the room. The house was otherwise quiet, and there were no environmental sources that could have clearly explained the sound. Throughout this period, though, I also experienced a reoccurring sense of being observed while inside of the house. This didn't occur constantly and didn't feel like fear in the moment, but more like a persistent awareness that would surface without a clear trigger. It never followed me outside of the home too, which was a bit weird, but I've considered multiple explanations for all of this. Anxiety, imagination, sleep-related disturbances and normal visual misinterpretations in low light, all of it. But none of it fully accounts for the consistency of the location, the timing, and the repetition. At the same time, there's no concrete evidence that anything external was present. These experiences decreased significantly after I moved out of that house though, which again is weird. They haven't followed me to other residences or anything, and I don't claim to know what caused them. But what unsettles me the most is not the idea that something unexplainable occurred, but that the experiences stopped entirely once the environment changed, without any conscious effort on my part to address them too. That makes me think that there was something about that place which was not normal. In late 2023, I moved to Chicago to begin a postgraduate program. I arrived with limited savings and focused on finding a short-term furnished room within walking distance of campus. Due to the cost constraints, my options were pretty narrow. After several weeks, I was offered a room in an older private residence about 15 minutes from the college. The rent was below market, which I attributed to the age of the building and the residential location. The property was a 2-level house though, built several decades earlier. It sat along a lightly trafficked road that bordered an active municipal cemetery at the rear. The owners were an elderly couple who presented as polite and pretty reserved. They rented rooms to students apparently, and handled meals themselves. Another adult lived on site and managed daily tasks, and he interacted with tenants more than the owners did. Now, I was assigned an upstairs bedroom at the back of the house. The window faced directly toward the cemetery grounds. At the time, it didn't really concern me too. I was focused on proximity to the campus and affordability. On my first evening though, dinner was delivered to my room rather than served in the common area. I initially assumed this was routine. During the delivery, the man responsible for the household duties became noticeably agitated while standing near the window. He told me to leave the room immediately, and when I hesitated, he physically guided me into the hallway, closed the door, and remained inside for several minutes. I could hear him speaking loudly, though I couldn't understand what he was actually saying. When he opened the door again, he told me directly not to open the window at any time, including during the day. No explanation was provided, and that was it. I agreed because I didn't want conflict and really had nowhere else to go at that point. Despite air conditioning, the room often felt unusually warm though, especially at night. This made sleep pretty difficult, but was not by itself alarming, I suppose. Anyway, over the following days, I noticed the household operated on rigid routines. Lights were off early, conversations were pretty limited. The owners attended church frequently and avoided discussing the property's history. When I asked general questions about the area, answers were pretty brief and always redirected. Within the first week, I began hearing what sounded like my name spoken softly near the window at night too. The voice was indistinct and inconsistent. At first I assumed it was the noise carrying from the street or nearby buildings or whatever. However, the windows were several meters above the ground level, and the sounds occurred even when there was no visible activity outside. I didn't open the window, obviously. In fact, I avoided looking directly at it after dark. The disturbances became more frequent, though. I would return from classes to find the window unlocked or partially open, despite leaving it closed. When questioned, the household staff either denied entering the room or claimed not to remember as well. At night, I heard intermittent sounds from the bathroom, including running water when the fixtures were dry. There were also brief impacts against the window frame, as if something had struck it lightly. The final incident, though, that occurred shortly after midnight on a weekday. I was awake due to noise and sitting upright in bed, and I noticed a shape positioned near the window that didn't align with the reflections or the shadows from outside lighting. It remained stationary and appeared to be sort of oriented toward me. I couldn't identify facial features clearly, but I was certain that something was present that had not been there just moments earlier. I didn't investigate further. Instead, I exited the room immediately, left the house, and I stayed elsewhere that night, a little bit spooked. The next day, I removed my belongings and informed the owners that I would not be returning. I did not request an explanation, and none was offered. I later secured housing further from campus at a higher cost. Since leaving that house too, I have not experienced similar disturbances. I later secured housing further from that campus at a higher cost, but I was glad to be out of there because whatever that was, and whatever was going on there, it wasn't normal. While my family was living in Ontario, Canada, my father was active duty and we lived in military housing just outside of the main residential area. I had spent the afternoon at a classmate's house and my father came to collect me shortly after sunset. He was back at this point. The route that he chose was not the primary access road as well. Instead, he used a service road that ran through a large section of managed woodland and connected to a secondary checkpoint at some point. It shortened the drive by several miles and was rarely used by civilian traffic. The road had no street lighting, limited shoulders, and long stretches with no visibility beyond the vehicle's headlights. I was seated in the front passenger seat. We talked casually at first about school, plans for the evening, whether we would be late for dinner and stuff like that. The car interior was warm and the radio was off. The traffic was pretty much non-existent. Several minutes into the drive, though, the conversation ended without either of us intentionally stopping it. I remember noticing the silence because it felt sort of abrupt, but shortly after I became aware of a physical sensation that didn't align with the environment. A drop in the temperature and a tightening at the base of my skull. These sensations were not dramatic, but they were persistent enough to draw my attention away from the road. I didn't turn around, I didn't look in the mirrors, and what stood out most was a strong reluctance to check the back seats, despite having no clear reason to suspect anything was even wrong. The feeling was not fear in a conventional sense, but more like a conviction that acknowledging whatever was causing the discomfort would make the situation worse. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my father's posture had changed as well. He was sitting rigidly, hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't adjust the mirrors or glance sideways, which was unusual for him on dark roads. The vehicle that we were in was a large SUV with 2 full rows behind us. The sense that something was occupying the space behind the second row, it remained constant for several minutes. Mind you, there were no sounds, no movement, and no visual cues. The sensation didn't escalate, but it also didn't diminish until we reached the illuminated perimeter of the base checkpoint. Once we passed through the gate and continued toward our housing area, the discomfort faded gradually. Neither of us commented on it at the time, and we pulled into the driveway, and after the engine shut off, we remained seated longer than necessary, the silence continuing. I eventually turned to look at my father. He was already looking at me, and without prompting, he asked whether I had noticed anything unusual during the drive, specifically referencing the back of the vehicle. I confirmed that I had, and I described my reluctance to turn around or to speak, and he responded that he had experienced the same hesitation and that he had looked in the rearview mirror and apparently had seen something. We didn't attempt to define what the sensation was. We agreed only on the timing and the fact that it ended once we reached a populated, well-lit area. No further incidents occurred on that road before or after that, and years later, I asked him whether he remembered that drive, and he did. His interpretation was practical. He attributed it to fatigue, low sensory input, and the brain's tendency to misinterpret silence and darkness as threat indicators. I find that explanation plausible, but still, he did say that he did see something. A black shadow or a dark mass sitting in the back of the vehicle. The precise overlap in our reactions, and it was all without communication, mind you. It remains difficult to dismiss this entirely. Well, for me at least, not for my dad. Nothing ever followed from that experience. There were no reoccurring events, no changes in behavior, and no similar shared episodes ever again. It stands out only because it was simultaneous, unspoken, and resolved the moment that external conditions changed. I work as a site foreman for a residential construction, primarily overseeing late-stage inspections on new builds. That means that I'm usually alone on site early in the morning and also again in the late afternoon, checking work completed by subcontractors and documenting anything that needs correction. I am pretty accustomed to inconsistencies, mislabeled breakers, fixtures installed out of sequence, temporary power still live when it shouldn't be. Most irregularities have straightforward explanations, but this incident, it occurred in March of 2022 on a single-family build outside of Ohio, in a newly developed subdivision that was still largely unoccupied. The house had passed through rough inspections and was nearing final electrical sign-off. According to the schedule, the electricians had completed their work the previous afternoon. I arrived on site just after 6:30 in the morning to perform a standard walkthrough, and I followed my usual routine, checking outlet polarity, verifying fixture placement, opening cabinets and confirming the closets and the storage areas were clear of debris. Everything was consistent too, until I entered the rear bedroom, which was designated as a guest room. Now, when I opened the closet door, the overhead light was on. That alone was not unusual. Trades frequently leave lights energized, and I reached for the switch mounted outside of the closet opening and toggled it off. Nothing happened though. I flipped it several more times with no change. At that point, I assumed the switch leg had been wired incorrectly or that the circuit was tied into temporary power or something. I stepped into the closet and I reached up to check the bulb temperature, expecting it to be warm. But it wasn't. The bulb was cool to the touch, despite being visibly illuminated. There were no audible hums, no vibrations, and no sign of heat buildup. I exited the closet and I called the electrical foreman assigned to the project. I described the issue and asked whether the circuit might still be tied into temporary feed. His response was immediate and specific though. That room was not designated to have a closet light at all. According to the plans, the closet was passive and had no electrical rough-in. He said that there should be no fixture, no wiring, and no switch controlling it. I returned to the closet to photograph what I was seeing for documentation, but at that point, the light was off. The fixture was still physically present, but it was now unlit. I tested the switch again, no response. I checked the bulb once more and it remained cool. There was no power to the fixture and no visible indication that it had recently even been on. I inspected the attic access above the closet later that morning and I confirmed that there was no branch wiring feeding that location. After lunch I repeated the inspection with the same result. The light didn't come on again and the switch never functioned. I didn't escalate the issue beyond a brief note in my personal log, and from a practical standpoint, there really was no actionable defect to report. The fixture was not powered, and the electrical scope matched the plans. Although it was weird that the electrical foreman said that there shouldn't be anything there. Raising the issue formally would have invited unnecessary attention without evidence, I guess. Anyway, eventually I went back to that room at some point, and you will not believe it, but that light fixture, it was now gone. And when I stepped into that room, there was something off about it. The whole room felt cold and it was eerie. I began to exit the room, and that's when I swear that I heard whispers coming from the walls. I know that sounds crazy, and look, maybe it was nothing, maybe it was mice or rats in the walls or something. I'm not sure, but it was creepy. I still have no plausible explanation for how that light switch was there and on during the morning, and how by evening it was like it had just disappeared out of existence. I mean, there was no hole in the roof where the fixture should have been. I even confirmed later that there was no wiring there. And yet, I remember seeing it. Heck, I even have a photo of it. I don't know what the heck was going on, and that whole situation was just so strange that I don't like thinking about it. I was visiting my grandparents in 2021, sitting at their kitchen table while they ate lunch, when the conversation drifted toward family history and relatives that I'd never met. At one point, my grandfather brought up an incident that he said was the most unusual thing that he had personally experienced, though he was careful not to label it as anything supernatural. He explained that the event occurred in early of 1998, and when he was still working full-time. He was commuting before sunrise, leaving the house at around 4:30 in the morning for an early shift. At the time, he lived in Henderson, Nevada, and regularly drove north toward Boulders Highway, passing through lightly trafficked intersections early in the morning. He emphasized that he was not fully alert, but was also not falling asleep at the wheel or anything, just sort of operating on routine and muscle memory, as he had done for years by this point. He described stopping at a red light near a transit stop where a small group of people were waiting. This was certainly not unusual for the area. As he watched them from inside of his truck, one individual separated from the group and crossed directly in front of his vehicle instead of heading toward the stop. The person was wearing a jacket with the hood up, which initially prevented my grandfather from seeing his face. As the person crossed in front of the headlights, he paused briefly, lowered the hood, made eye contact, smiled, and raised a hand in a short wave. My grandfather immediately recognized the man as my grandmother's father. According to him, the recognition was immediate and specific, not vague or impressionistic. He didn't describe confusion about the identity at the time, only confusion afterward about why that person would be there in the first place. The light changed shortly afterward, and the individual continued walking out of view. My grandfather drove on without stopping, and he told us that his first reaction was sort of dismissal. He assumed that his mind must be playing tricks on him, under poor lighting conditions while he was tired. He reminded himself that Daniel lived several hundred miles away in Tucson, Arizona, and had no reason to be in Nevada, especially at that hour. Later that same day, my grandparents received a phone call informing them that Daniel had died unexpectedly that morning due to a medical event. The timing placed his death within hours of the commute that my grandfather described. There was no indication that Daniel had traveled, and there was no evidence that he had left Arizona. My grandfather was clear that he believed that he encountered a physical person. He also insists that it wasn't anything paranormal. His conclusion has always been that the experience was either a coincidence combined with misidentification or a stress-related perceptual error that only gained significance after the phone call. My grandmother added that after her father's death, she occasionally noticed sounds in her home that she associated with his habits, such as pacing or footsteps at specific times of the day, things like this. She acknowledged that these could have just been explained by memory and routine rather than any external cause. She didn't treat them as evidence of anything beyond the difficulty of adjusting to loss, but the reason that this story has stayed with them is not because they believe it proves anything unusual, but because of the sequence of the events. They just never fit cleanly into a single explanation, and even they admit that it's a bit weird. So, both of them remain grounded in the idea that coincidence, fatigue, and the brain's tendency to fill in gaps are more likely the factors that explain everything, but still, they admit that the timing is very strange. I want to be clear about the context before describing what happened. so I'm an adult with no history of hallucinations, panic disorders, or dissociative episodes, or anything like that. I do not use recreational drugs, I had not consumed alcohol, and I was not sleep deprived at the time that this happened. I have experienced sleep paralysis once, years ago, and this event does not resemble that in any functional way. I was awake, oriented, and aware of my surroundings. So, the incident occurred in March of 2022. Our child was just over 1 year old at the time, and the layout of the bedroom is pretty relevant to the story. So our bed faces a built-in wardrobe with a full-heighted mirrored panel, and the crib, it's positioned several feet away, partially visible through the reflection depending on how you're sort of lying there on the bed. Now, I awoke abruptly sometime around 2 in the morning. The immediate trigger was a sort of sharp sound consistent with a floorboard shifting or compressing under weight, but really, really aggressive. That noise alone would not usually alarm me, but my physiological response was immediate and extreme for some reason. My heart rate spiked and I experienced a full adrenaline response that I would normally associate with a real external threat. Mind you, there was no gradual confusion or grogginess. My thoughts were clear and sequential, and it all just sort of happened in a moment. I didn't move at first. This was deliberate too, not involuntary. I was assessing what I was seeing before acting, because in the mirror, I could see a human-shaped figure positioned near the crib. It was upright and motionless. The outline loosely matched my wife's height and posture, but several details did not align, including position and timing. I knew that she was beside me, and I could hear her breathing. I watched for several seconds, attempting to determine whether this was a reflection artifact or a shadow or some other misinterpretation caused by low light. But the longer that I observed it, the more convinced I became that it was not my wife and not a simple reflection error. At the same time, I didn't perceive it as interacting with the environment in any way. But the moment that I decided to sit up and physically confront whatever I was seeing, whatever it was just disappeared. I immediately lifted up my head and looked directly toward the crib, but there was nothing there. My wife had not moved and was still asleep, and what stood out the most was how scared I was throughout all of this. Mind you, this was not anxiety or panic or anything. It was a reflexive threat response that activated before conscious interpretation was even possible. I have experienced stress and even some fear in other contexts, and this felt different in both intensity and immediacy. I didn't wake my wife at that point. I stayed awake for some time, checking the room and listening for further sounds, but nothing else occurred before morning. The following evening is pretty relevant too, because it introduced a second anomaly, though I'm careful not to treat it as a confirmation of anything unusual. So our daughter had followed a pretty consistent sleep routine since infancy. On this particular night, she was put down at around 9 o'clock as usual, and at around 11:15 she woke crying. This was pretty unusual, but not alarming on its own. So we resettled her and we returned to our routine. She woke up again though, and this time significantly distressed. She didn't respond to feeding or other usual calming measures, and only settled when removed from the room entirely. Eventually, I stayed in the room with her until she fell asleep shortly after 1 in the morning, and she slept uninterrupted after that. Now, from a practical standpoint, there are several plausible explanations for this. I get that. I mean, she's a baby, and infants can experience disrupted sleep cycles for reasons unrelated to their environment or anything spooky, right? What remains unresolved for me, though, is not the possibility of explanation, but the certainty that I experienced in the moment that something was definitely present, followed by what happened this night. I'm not asserting a paranormal cause. I really don't know what it was. I guess I'm just documenting the event because it just wasn't normal, and it's not like any other experience I can reference in my own life. Despite being fully awake and rational at the time, I'm sure of it. I haven't experienced anything since then, but I certainly won't forget what happened that night because it absolutely terrified me right to the core. This happened in early spring of 2022 in a small town in southern Germany. I was at home with my cousin Mark and we were just drinking a beer late at night and talking about family or something like that. But the conversation turned to my younger brother, Jonas, who had unfortunately died in a motorcycle accident at around the age of 18, roughly 2 years prior. His death, it had been really sudden, and there were still many things left unresolved emotionally about that, especially for me. But at some point, Mark checked the time on his phone and mentioned that it was like 3:10. That caught our attention too because Jonas had officially been pronounced dead at 3:12, according to the hospital report. We acknowledged the coincidence and we made a few dark jokes, mostly as a way to manage the mood, I think. I mentioned that I had always thought that it would have been normal to share drinks with my brother once we were both adults, something that never really happened. On impulse, we decided to walk to the cemetery and have a bit of a drink there in his memory. Alcohol was involved, but neither of us was impaired at any point. The cemetery, it's about 1.5 kilometers from my house, and the walk takes roughly 20 to 25 minutes, I would say. While walking, we talked casually about death, religion, and whether people leave anything behind beyond memories. At one point, partly joking and partly serious, I said that if anything like an afterlife existed, some kind of obvious coincidence would be convincing, something visible and immediate, like an animal passing close by or something like that. Nothing happened during the walk. At the cemetery too, we stood by Jonas's grave, talked for a few minutes and drank quietly. Mark noticed a small metal model car that had been placed there by another family member. He asked what it represented, and I explained that Jonas had always wanted to own a specific model of a pickup truck one day. After finishing our drinks, we left and we headed back toward town. Just before we exited the cemetery gate, though, an insect flew directly into my face, hitting my cheek. I didn't say anything at the time because, well, it seemed pretty irrelevant to the whole thing, but a few seconds later, once we were on the street outside of the cemetery, a bird flew out of the hedge at street level and continued straight down the road in front of us. It startled both of us simply because of just how close it passed, and we commented on it briefly, still not taking it too seriously. That's when I mentioned the insect, and Mark said the same thing had happened to him moments earlier. That overlap made us sort of stop walking for a moment and acknowledge the weird timing of everything. We didn't assign meaning to it, but we did recognize that it was unusual enough to notice. Out of curiosity more than belief, really, we continued walking in the direction that the bird had flown. At the next intersection, the bird was standing on the road. As we approached, it flew down the street to the left, and we followed again, and it repeated the behavior once more before flying upward and sort of disappearing. Now, less than a minute after the bird had vanished, I saw something behind some hedges. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It looked like a shadow or something like that. I pointed it out to Mark, and he said that he could see it too, and we weren't really sure what it was. But then, it moved. It was like a person standing there, but just all black and completely shadow-like. I've never seen anything like it before or since then, and we hightailed it out of there because we were so spooked and we weren't sure what we were actually looking at or if our eyes were just playing tricks on us or something. The following morning, I was sitting in the kitchen with my mother, explaining what had happened. During the conversation, a bird landed in our yard near the window and stayed there briefly before leaving. My mother commented that it was uncommon to see that species so close to the house. In hindsight, none of these events are impossible to explain individually, I suppose. Insects, birds, shadows, I don't know. Maybe fatigue, alcohol, emotional context, and pattern recognition, like played a role in how we interpreted the sequence or something. Whatever the case may be, it was certainly a strange night. I don't treat it as evidence of communication or signs of the paranormal or whatever, but what it provided was a sense of closure, I guess, during a period when we were actively thinking about loss. Whether coincidence or psychology, the experience helped rather than harmed, and that is ultimately why it has stayed with me. This happened when I was about 15, and about several hours from the nearest hospital or police station. My family lived in a detached house near a logging road, accessible by a single highway that was frequently closed in winter due to snow, ice, or even some rock slides. Because of that, my parents often stayed overnight in town when they had appointments or errands that ran late. I was the oldest child, and I was left in charge during those trips. At the time, I took that responsibility pretty seriously, sometimes to an unhealthy degree, I guess you could say. We relied on a wood-burning stove for heat. Power outages were pretty common here, and emergency response times were pretty long as well. There were also ongoing concerns about wildlife and occasional property crime in the region, and all of that contributed to a constant sense of vigilance. For several years before this incident, I had reoccurring nightmares centered on failing to protect my younger siblings. The scenarios varied all the time. Fires, break-ins, medical emergencies, but the common theme was that I was responsible and something went terribly wrong. By my mid-teens, these dreams were happening at least once a week and were vivid enough to cause panic on waking. On this particular night, my parents had driven into Prince George and were staying overnight. I had my younger siblings Liam and Noah, 6 and 8 respectively, sleeping in my room to reduce my anxiety. I stayed awake much longer than usual, listening for sounds and checking the stove repeatedly. My anxiety was getting the better of me. But sometime after midnight, I fell asleep, and I remember waking abruptly and checking the clock. It read 3 in the morning. I had the immediate impression that something was wrong, though. Although nothing specific had happened yet. I looked to my left and right and noticed that the bed felt lighter or something. In the dream state that I was sort of still in, I concluded that my siblings were missing, and what followed was a continuous sequence that felt completely real. I searched every room in the house, calling their names, checking the doors, and moving from room to room without finding anyone. The house was silent, and I remember standing at the base of the stairs and realizing that no matter what I did next, I would not be able to fix what had just happened. At that point, I woke up fully. I was in my bed. Both boys were asleep next to me. The room was quiet. I checked the clock again, and it still read 3 o'clock in the morning. The relief was immediate, but definitely short-lived, because within seconds, I heard what sounded like a baby crying in the hallway outside of my room. The sound was sustained and close enough to seem just beyond the door. This caused a moment of just absolute confusion rather than immediate fear for me. I mean, there were no infants in our household. The youngest child was 6 years old, and so I stayed still, listening, trying to determine whether the sound was coming from inside of the house or from outside, possibly echoing. The crying continued for several minutes, and I didn't leave the room. Eventually, the sound stopped. I don't recall falling asleep again, but I woke up later that morning with daylight in the room. Everybody in the house was okay. There were no signs of anyone moving around during the night as well, and when I asked my next oldest sibling if he had heard anything unusual, he said no. At the time, I interpreted the experience as threatening and intentional, but as an adult, I'm not really sure. I have returned to that house many times since then. I no longer experience anything similar there. The difference is that I am no longer responsible for children, I suppose, no longer isolated in the same way and no longer living in a constant state of alertness, I suppose, but what made the event memorable was not that something unexplainable happened, but just that I really don't have any answers for it. The fear, it felt real, to my nervous system at the time at least, and really, I was scared. The property that we lived on was several kilometers off of the main highway, accessed by an unsealed road with limited lighting and long stretches without any houses too. My younger brother and I were returning home late in the evening one day after a supply run into town. I was 33 and he was 29 at the time. He died a few years later, unfortunately, which is one reason that this memory has always stayed so vivid. So he was driving and I was in the passenger seat. It was sometime after 10 o'clock, dry weather, clear visibility, and the road was straight for several hundred meters before ending in a T-intersection where you could either turn left toward a cattle station or you could go right toward a disused quarry road. We were traveling roughly at about 80 kilometers an hour, headlights on in high beam, radio playing quietly. There was really nothing unusual up to that point. But as we approached the intersection, I noticed a dark vertical shape standing in the middle of the road, roughly where the junction began. At first I assumed it was a signpost or maybe a person or maybe even some livestock. As the distance closed in though, it became clear that it was not reflective, and whatever it wasn't moving, and it wasn't positioned like anything that normally belonged there should be. I began asking my brother what he thought it was. He didn't answer immediately, and as we got closer, the shape appeared taller than a person. It was maybe 2.5 meters tall by rough estimation, but it didn't appear to be standing on the road surface in a normal way either. What I mean is that there was a visible gap beneath it that made depth perception really difficult, and I sort of noted this out loud, and my brother said only that he was not going to slow down. At no point did the object step forward, retreat, or react in any way consistent with an animal or a person attempting to avoid a vehicle. It remained stationary until we were nearly upon it. At that moment, it appeared to sort of rotate or shift orientation toward the car. And what happened next was the most disorienting thing that I have ever experienced. There was no impact in the traditional sense. Instead, there was a sudden loud sound across the exterior of the vehicle, similarly to a heavy sheet or flexible material or something like that, being dragged rapidly over metal. The windshield's visibility dropped for less than a second, as though something had passed over the lights in the bonnet. My brother reacted by swerving left off of the road and braking hard. The vehicle stopped partly in the cleared paddock area, adjacent to the intersection. The engine stalled. We sat in silence for several seconds. There was nothing outside of the vehicle now. No debris, no marks on the road, no damaged vegetation, and no visible source of where the sound had come from. The headlights illuminated empty ground and fence posts, and we exited the car briefly and checked around it, and we found no physical damage, thankfully. We drove home without further incident, and we arrived within about 10 minutes. When we described the experience to family members, my brother struggled to speak and was visibly shaken. In fact, he avoided discussing it afterward for the most part. Over time, I have revisited the event, and with a more critical lens, I guess you could say. The most likely explanation is that it was maybe dust or mist or something, or maybe some sort of an airborne animal intersecting with the headlight beams at the intersection or something. The covering sensation could possibly have been a large bird, or maybe a wind-borne debris or something, maybe a tarp from a nearby fence that was lifted momentarily by air displacement or something. But really, when I think about it, none of that really explains things all that well. I don't know what it was that we saw that night. I miss my brother terribly, and I often think about him when I remember this. So I was working a daytime shift around this time, and before this incident, I had already heard secondhand accounts from co-workers about a woman who would occasionally enter the shop, leave unsolicited items, and speak at length about danger, visions, or needing to warn people, or something like that. I had never encountered her directly myself, and these stories were treated as odd but not threatening. According to staff who had seen her previously, she usually appeared calm, spoke coherently, paid for small items, and left behind objects like candles or handwritten notes or household charms. Management? They didn't ban her because she had never caused a disturbance before, and by the time that I started working there, she was spoken about more as a curiosity than a risk. The day that I saw her, though, the situation was different from those earlier descriptions. I was behind the counter when shouting started outside in the parking area. It sounded like an argument, but only one voice was raised. One of my co-workers went to look and came back visibly unsettled, saying the woman was yelling at someone who was just not responding. When I looked through the window, I saw her car pulling forward abruptly. The rear panel was marked with crude symbols, all painted in red, unevenly applied, as if done quickly and without planning. I didn't recognize the markings, and I didn't study them long enough to even try, really. She entered the cafe at speed, though, ignored staff, and went straight into the restroom. She slammed the door and began yelling phrases that sounded religious but disordered, I guess. It was not a full prayer, but sort of like fragments repeated inconsistently. The only clearly recognizable words were altered portions of a Christian prayer, spoken incorrectly and interrupted by long pauses. She was breathing heavily and sweating, and this was not a performative behavior aimed at an audience or anything. It appeared completely uncontrolled. After several minutes, she exited, though, placed a metal crucifix on the counter without any explanation, and just walked back outside. She filled a disposable cup with some water from the self-serve station, stepped onto the pavement, and poured it in a rough circle around herself. She stepped in and out of the circle multiple times, then stood still and began to shake. A co-worker approached her slowly and spoke to her until she calmed enough to leave, and when she drove away, she was honking the horn continuously. The cafe was silent for a short period afterward. When I went to clear the counter, I noticed a physical reaction that I couldn't ignore. I felt sudden nausea, pressure in my ears, and a brief sense of, disorientation or something. I didn't touch the object, but I just suddenly felt weird. What made it even more unsettling to me personally, too, was that I had experienced a really weird dream, a very vivid one that night before, involving an unfamiliar religious object being placed inside of my home without any permission. I'm not religious by any means, and I generally don't think about religious symbols at all. I didn't mention the dream as well until after this incident. When my co-worker returned inside, I asked her exactly what the woman had been saying in the restroom. The phrasing that she repeated matched what I had heard through the door as well, and that alignment, combined with my physical reaction, was enough for me to step away from the counter and ask someone else to remove the object using some gloves. Now, I want to be clear that I understand how a mental health crisis can present suddenly and dramatically. Nothing I observed requires a non-medical explanation, I know that. However, what complicated this for the staff was that several people had known this woman years earlier and described her as stable, employed, and socially functional. According to them, the change had been abrupt rather than gradual, and it was strange. I did not claim that she was being followed or influenced by anything external. What concerned me more than anything was that she didn't seem to be receiving any help or anything. What concerned me more than anything was that she just wasn't receiving any help or anything as far as I knew. Whether her beliefs came from trauma, illness, or some sort of long-held cultural framework or something, I really cannot say. The cafe, they didn't file a police report because, well, no crime occurred. Management documented the incident and instructed staff not to engage if she returned. As of now, she hasn't come back. While I don't think anyone witnessed anything sort of inexplicable or anything like that, the feeling that I got from that crucifix, I will never forget that. In 2017, I accepted a short-term contract in Western Norway, near a small inland lake outside of Voss. The job was seasonal and required pretty long hours, so the employer provided shared accommodation on a private lakeside property used by staff during peak months. I was in my late 20s at the time, and this was a pretty big adventure for me. The property consisted of a main house at the top of a slope and several auxiliary structures near the waterline. A long stairway connected the two levels, and at the bottom there was a storage shed for boats and a standalone wood-heated sauna positioned close to the lake. The surrounding area was heavily forested, with neighboring cabins spread far enough apart that visibility at night was pretty minimal. There was no artificial lighting beyond what was installed in the buildings themselves, too. Now, most evenings, multiple employees used the sauna together after work. It was sort of routine and pretty much uneventful. On this particular night, I returned later than usual, shortly after 10:30. The others were inside eating and drinking and declined to come down with me, so I decided to go it alone, which was not completely unusual and didn't feel unsafe or anything at the time. Anyway, I turned on the sauna, waited for it to reach temperature, and stayed inside for roughly, I would say 10 minutes. When I exited, I walked toward the lake to cool off a bit. The area was quiet, there was no wind, and the water surface was really still. As I entered the lake to about knee depth, I heard a sustained whistling sound, though, coming from the tree line on the opposite side of the clearing. It was loud enough to be deliberate, but not shouted, I guess. My first assumption was that it was a bird or somebody else on the property. I stopped and listened, and the sound didn't repeat immediately. To test whether it was a person, I whistled back once without thinking much about it, and the response came back within seconds, closely matching the length and the pitch of what I had just produced. At that point, I considered that it might be an echo or someone responding from the main house. To rule that out, I altered the pattern deliberately, changing the rhythm and spacing it in a way that would be difficult to mistake for coincidence. The response came back again, closely matched and also noticeably closer than the first time. This is where my reaction shifted from curiosity to a little bit concerned. I could not identify a clear source of the sound, and I couldn't see movement or light in the direction that it came from. I decided not to stay to test it out any further, though. I exited the water immediately, left my towel behind, and I went back up the stairs to the house at a fast pace. Everyone was still inside, seated at the table, and no one had left during that time. I asked directly whether anyone had gone outside or heard any whistling or anything, and the answer was no. There was no joking or confusion. The question was taken seriously because of my state when I came in as well. I didn't experience anything further that night. There were no additional sounds, and I didn't return to the sauna alone for the remainder of my stay. But in the following days, I asked local residents and co-workers about wildlife in the area. I learned that certain owls and foxes in the region can produce sounds that resemble humans and can respond to noise patterns, especially near water at night, but never whistling. I was not aware of this at the time, and with the distance and the fact that the whistling was coming closer to me and not moving away, as most animals would, right? That makes me think that there was another person out there. But really, there shouldn't have been anyone out there. I don't know who that was, but it was strange, and really nobody should have been out there, and they would have been trespassing for sure at that stage. Again, I don't know who it was, but I'm just glad that I never had to find out. I live in a house which dates back to the late 1800s. Tons of history, and I looked into previous owners and know that they had children, most of whom sadly didn't survive very long. I've not had any experiences so far. I've lived here since October, but I do sometimes feel like I'm being watched. It's never felt malicious, I guess, but still a bit weird. However, today, I have a speaker plugged into my TV, which only ever activates usually when the TV is on. But when the TV was off, the speaker turned on alone. I really don't know how that's possible, because it can literally only turn on with power from the TV. It's a soundbar. Also, I was upstairs for hours organizing and tidying a room that I'd neglected, and I came back down to put something in the living room to find my salt lamp turned on. This is a lamp which only can be turned on by a remote, which is on the TV stand, and which definitely was not accidentally pressed or anything. It's also probably worth noting too that while I was sorting out stuff, my dog was sitting with his back to me facing open doors, almost as if he was watching out for something. I have no doubt that if there is something here that it's friendly. I have zero bad vibes, I guess you could say, but still, it is just a teeny bit unsettling. Also kind of fascinating, I guess, but I'd love to know your thoughts or possible debunks. I'm not one of these people who are dead set, pardon the pun, on everything being paranormal. So if you have any explanation as to how lights and speakers can turn on their own like that, then genuinely I would love to hear it. But if you do think that it is paranormal, I would also love to hear your thoughts and how to keep this whole thing friendly. My older brother recently moved into a house with his pregnant wife. This was last summer. My younger brother, he's not younger than me, just younger than my other brother, and Dad moved in October, and me and my mum, we moved in December. The house was made around the 1930s, and during these months, we encountered nothing out of the ordinary, except for when me and my mum moved in, I guess. The baby was safely born in November. During the summer to October, it was just my brother and his wife, nothing weird. The house has 2 floors plus a basement and a driveway in the back. Now, in December, my sister-in-law's phone wallpaper changed to Tom from Tom and Jerry, smoking a fat cigar. She left the phone on her bed on the 2nd floor, left for like 3 minutes and then came back, and it was changed. It was nothing too weird, I guess, because we thought that it was just a glitch, but then in mid-January, when my older brother and his friend were in the basement, there were 3 knocks on the basement back door, which leads to the driveway. There was also some movement outside, which my brother saw through the glass window. When I heard this, I thought that it must have just been the wind, but my older brother was really shook by this, which was weird for him. He was adamant that it was definitely a person or a figure at least. Then a few days ago, while I was passing my younger brother's room, I swore that I saw 2 feet on the bed. I thought that it was just my brother in his room, but when I went downstairs, as soon as I went, my brother came into the house through the front door. I asked him, "Hey, weren't you just upstairs?" And he said no to this. "Maybe it was a ghost, haha," he said. I was so sure though that I saw 2 feet that I actually thought that he was in his room, so I went back upstairs, retraced my steps, and there was nothing there. My eyesight isn't the best, I guess, but I don't know, it seemed real. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, I don't know. I also watch a lot of scary movies, and I guess that adds more to the fear, but yesterday we were wondering about how the phone wallpaper changed like it did. We all agreed that no one did it, so We're all pretty serious people, and I don't actually think anyone would lie about it. My older brother said that maybe they changed it to Tom smoking a cigar because my dad smoked cigarettes in the back of the house. Not fat ones or cigars or anything, just regular ones. I guess it makes sense, but it just seems kind of dumb to me, I suppose. Is this thing toying with us? Is there even a thing that exists here? We still haven't told my younger brother about any of this because he's going to stay in the basement after the renovations are done. And all of this started when the basement renovations began. My younger brother doesn't want to even go to the first floor if there's no one in it, because he's actually pretty scared of it. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Is there something in my house, and if there is, can I do anything about it? So some years back, we bought a piece of property. I was walking around it and a van was parked in the back of the woods somewhere. I called in the number on the van and the wife of the owner called the police, and after a day of, well, BS really, they found him hanging in a tree on the back corner of the property, unfortunately. He died in the place that he loved the most, his wife said. Anyway, fast forward to one morning as the sun was coming up, and I heard footsteps running down the hall to the side of my bed. I have 2 boys, so this wasn't really alarming at all at the moment, but I was actually in the house by myself that day. I opened my eyes and there was a blonde-haired boy in blue jean overalls standing next to my bed. I have blonde-haired children too, but I suddenly realized that this was not my kid, and all of a sudden the boy started to vanish from the head down, and soon was just gone. I slept with my pistol next to me for 2 nights after that, as if that would have done any good, but it was comforting, I guess. I rented the house out for years too, and I came back to live there, so I needed to change my address. I went to the local post office and I was talking to the clerk and she knew the address. She then said, "My dad actually ended himself on that property, you know." We talked a little bit and I asked her about it. What was your dad like as a boy? What did he wear and look like as a kid? And my jaw dropped when she said blue jean overalls and he had blonde hair. We talked about what I had seen and she wasn't surprised at all, and that was honestly surprising to me because apparently she had experienced things as well with her deceased dad. I never told my kids about this experience, but after finding out who the ghost was, I guess I wasn't really afraid of another encounter if it did happen. There were some noises and doors that were opened when I walked by that were closed the next time that I saw them. And you can say what you want, but I think that he came back as a boy that used to enjoy the land my house is on. He seems to be gone now, at least, because I've never seen or heard anything out of the ordinary in years now. But really, who knows? Maybe tonight or tomorrow or some other time, I'll experience something again. My husband and I moved into this house that we currently live in a little over 4 years ago. We live on Long Island, New York, in a very old colonial house built in 1907. Ever since moving in, we've experienced some very strange things. The first experience still freaks me out to this day. I left work early as I was sick with a cold that day. I went straight upstairs to our bedroom to take a nap, and after lying in bed for a few short minutes, I heard the sound of someone coming up the stairs. Clear as day footsteps on each step. Now, our staircase has 2 sets of stairs with a landing in between, so whoever it was made their way slowly up the first set, paused for a moment, then the second set. Our bedroom door sits at the step of the stairs, and whatever it was, it just stopped right at our door. I rationalized at first as my husband coming home from work, but that didn't make sense as he wouldn't be due to come home for like another hour and a half. And in my heart, I knew that it wasn't him. I genuinely got such a scared feeling that my entire body stiffened up and all of my senses heightened. Later, when my husband did come home, I asked him if he came home early and then maybe went downstairs again, and told him what I heard, but he said no, he just got home. But he didn't quite believe me, I guess. Well, about a month later, he experienced the same thing. He was home from work alone and laid down to take a nap when he heard footsteps coming up the stairs. He then started believing, and it was then that he started believing that we weren't alone in the house. We had our baby, a boy, in 2021, and one night I was up breastfeeding him. I used to go downstairs to our living room so my husband could sleep as he went back to work after paternity leave. I'm sitting on my big comfy armchair snuggling our newborn who fell asleep in my arms, when I suddenly hear footsteps upstairs. Clear as day again, footsteps in our upstairs hallway. I freeze and listen carefully, knowing that I didn't hear our bedroom door open, so it couldn't have been my husband. Oddly enough, about 10 minutes later, my husband does get up to use the bathroom, and I call up to him and ask him if he was up before, to which he said that no, he just got up then to go to the bathroom. I was really creeped out. I refused to breastfeed downstairs anymore, and I only did it in our bedroom from then on. The last big thing that happened was my mum, who lives out of state, was coming to visit and babysat for us to give us our first official date night out since having our son. We got home after dinner and my mum looked absolutely horrified. She said that she was sitting on the rocking chair while my son was asleep in her arms when suddenly she heard footsteps outside the bedroom door, and then 3 loud bangs against it, like someone was banging their fists against it angrily. She said that she jumped right up and opened the door to check, but when she did, nobody was there. She then anxiously awaited our arrival back and has been afraid to stay with us ever since then. Since then too, we've experienced little things here and there, but it seems like the activity has died down. My son is older now and has told us that the walls in his room talk to him, which creeped us out a lot, but we chalked it up to an overactive toddler imagination. I'm honestly glad that nothing has really happened since then, as it sincerely freaks me out, and I really, really don't want my son getting scared either. I also want to add one more thing too that may or may not be related to what we have also experienced. One day a few months ago, we were eating dinner with my son, and out of nowhere he tells us, "I played with Grandpa yesterday." So we assumed that he meant my dad, as my husband's father unfortunately passed away several years ago. And when I asked him what he meant, because we haven't seen my dad in a while, he said, "No, not that Grandpa, my other grandpa." My husband and I looked at each other and asked him what his grandpa looked like, and he said, "He looks like a girl with long hair and he had wings and flew up in the sky." My husband's dad, he was a musician and had long hair all of his life. And I kid you not, we were so freaked out, but also sort of relieved, I guess. Like maybe this ghost or whatever was his grandpa looking out for us. I'm really not sure, but it is one of the craziest things to happen to me ever, and really, I just want it to stop. This was a couple of years ago now. I was still in college. I worked at my local high school in South Jersey on the night shift for some extra money. But unfortunately, the hours meant that I didn't really get to have a life during the week. I get a call from a friend group on a Friday before I headed into work saying that they were going to explore Clinton Road, which was known to be the scariest road in New Jersey. Obviously, I couldn't go, so I told them to let me know how they made out. Later in the night, I get a call from them, though, in a panic, saying that all these crazy things happened to them. They described what happened to them, how they threw coins over Ghost Boy Bridge, and they came back, a ghost truck following them, and the feeling of just being watched. Honestly, I thought that they were just hyping it up because of the fact that I missed out. So it was decided that we'd all go the next night, but this time I got to see it for myself. Something that I'd regret for the rest of my life. Us being from South Jersey, Clinton Road is a bit of a drive for us, about 2 hours, so there was plenty of time for us to get all hyped up and spooked out. Now, I can only describe myself as the manly man of the group, I guess, being 6'5" and 260 pounds. Especially back then, I had the persona of, it's all made up, nothing will scare us. But boy, was I completely wrong. Right when we get there, the entire vibe changed from, oh, we're all going to be spooked to, oh wait, this is actually pretty creepy. The road, it's in the middle of the woods, houses few and far between. The first thing that we see when we get there is a small mini-castle looking building. It's the best that I can describe it. And because of the far ride, we all had to pee at this point, so I went to the left, friend 2, Joe, went straight, and friend 3, Ha, went to the right. Friend 4 was female who stayed behind us in the road. After I was done, I immediately walked back along with Ha, but we noticed that Joe was walking towards the creepy building. I start shouting, asking what he was doing, and he turns back around with the look of shock. Me being completely confused, I ask, what are you doing walking there? And Joe swore up and down that I was actually behind the building waving at him to follow me to the building. So naturally, we're all getting pretty freaked out about that. We pull up to the bridge, Ghost Boy Bridge, and I check everyone for coins to make sure that they don't fake it just to scare me. We all throw the coins and, well, nothing happens. See guys, it's just all in your head. Let's go. So we all start walking back to the car and then I hear clinking. I hear the coins hit the road. We sprint back to check and we find the coins laying in the road. I was 100% convinced though that they were just messing with us, so I had the idea to mark a coin so they couldn't fake it. I threw the coin in the water, waited 5 minutes in silence, and nothing. See guys, let's go. But then, I hear the coins in the road again. I walk back and, well, it was a coin with the same exact markings that I had put on it. I'm extremely freaked out at this point, so we decided to go. Driving down the windy road in a newer sports car, we're all pretty freaked out and just want to leave at this stage. And that's when we see headlights appearing behind us, seemingly out of nowhere. Also, we didn't see them attached to a vehicle per se. I'm no car expert by any means, but I would almost bet my life on it that they were lights on an old truck, getting closer the faster that we went, taking bends at fast speeds that even a new truck wouldn't handle. Suddenly, though, the lights just disappear. So now, all in a panic, we decide to pull over to map our way out. There was dead silence, no lights except our headlights in the woods. And that is when we hear the typical woman ghost moan. And of course, what came with it was the typical woman in a white dress standing in the woods right next to our car, and suddenly she let out the loudest scream that I think I've ever heard. We also began screaming at this point, to get out and go, go, go and all that. Eventually, we put the car into gear and we get the heck out of there. Once we make it back to the main roads, we decide to dig a little bit deeper on this road. And apparently, according to the sources that I found at least, the ghost truck tries to make people crash on Dead Man's Curve. Allegedly, there have been numerous bodies buried there from the famous murderer, the Iceman. On our way home, we wanted to go back again the next night, on the Sunday, but we suddenly pass an old rundown church that looks like it hasn't been used in like 50 years. And of course, the sign left out front says, "You need Jesus on Sunday." Safe to say, I never went back, and even to this day, the friend group still refuses to talk about what happened that night on Clinton Road. I do hope that one day we can talk about it again because, I don't know, the whole thing just seems like a memory now, and I just really don't want to forget it. As late teens, early 20s, growing up in South Jersey, my friend group was always getting into ghost hunting on haunted roads and buildings around New Jersey and surrounding areas. But we always had some crazy experiences, I guess you could say, and this one was really no different. During this, we had the original friend group, plus another one of our friends as well. Now one night, brainstorming what to do, we decided to go on a little ghost hunt trip in our area. Everyone knew of our friend group as the ones that would always be getting into these kinds of things, so we would always be getting tipped off by other friends outside of the group as to what places to check out. We were tipped off to do a little haunted road not far from us, and we decided, heck, why not? It's better than nothing and just sitting here. So we all hop in the car and start the little trip towards the road. On the way, we happened to see a Wawa, which, of course, we had to stop at. Per usual, we were always hyping each other up to see if we could spook the others. While waiting in line, I'm messing with one of the friends that's not in the ghost friend group, saying, you're scared to go, aren't you? When out of nowhere, we hear, what's the little one scared of? I say little because the guys in the friend group were all abnormal-sized humans, the smallest being roughly 6'3" and 240, where the little one was just a normal-sized typical guy. These guys straight up look like they just didn't belong there, to be honest. Some sort of backroads, Texas chainsaw looking fellas. But we explained to the guy and his friend that we were going ghost hunting on a road. And simply put, they said, it's not that scary. If you really want to be scared, go here instead. So we leave, and hesitantly we all agree to actually go to the new hunt instead of the first trip. We get there, middle of the woods. We notice that there are some trees cut down and laying on the sides parallel to the road. Deeper and deeper into the woods, pitch black, and that's when the nervousness is really starting to build. We pull up to this sort of monument to commemorate a plane crash that had apparently happened there years ago. There's dead silence, pitch black, only the light shining from the moon was our light other than the car. The light shining from the moon was our only light source, other than the car lights, that is. To put a little bit of fear into us as well, we dared the driver to shut the lights off, which was a big mistake. He completely shuts the car off. A few minutes go by and we see this absolutely massive, and I mean massive shadow crawl from behind the statue and start narrowing in towards us. When I say massive too, I'm 6'5" plus and 260, and this thing had me looking like a third grader. We all started panicking and zoom away into the car. A bit disoriented, we didn't realize that we were driving deeper into the woods, to where we would hit a huge sand opening, in which there were many ways to go from there. In the end, we decided that it was best to turn around and try to map our way out. While doing so, our radio cuts out to almost like an old-time fashion music sort of thing. I happen to look up in confusion, and seconds after that, I see what I can only describe as a white face. Not a typical white face, but almost like a Jabberwocky's mask. Zero expression and almost a see-through body, if that makes sense. Just a face and then another and another. Now, I don't know if it was us just being disoriented and seeing things, or if this really was happening, but we all scream in unison, "Let's get out of here." So we fly out of the sand back on the same road where I had mentioned the trees earlier. Only this time on our way back, the trees, they were no longer parallel to the road, but actually in the middle of the road, blocking our exit. The driver, Joe, in a sports car, mind you, tells us to hold on, and we're driving on the side of the road next to the woods in what I can best describe as basically defying gravity to make our escape. We do manage to scrape through. Mind you, the car was a bit worse for wear afterwards, but we get out of there and we don't look back. Now, I don't know for certain if this place is legitimately haunted, or if we were set up by those two guys earlier in the night, but two things are for certain. One is, I'd bet my life that it's a combination of both a haunting and a bit of a setup, and two, I for sure will never be going back there again to find out. This is the story of my worst hitchhiking experience. This incident was really sketchy, but I still wouldn't give up my love for hitchhiking. I'm a 21-year-old, 20 at the time, man from Finland. So this happened on the 2nd of December last year in Kalamata, Greece. I had been hitchhiking for quite a while at that point. I had started from Budapest and had hitchhiked through 7 different countries with only ever positive outcomes. The story begins around 11 a.m. on Saturday. So some hours before I had awoken in my hammock, which was hung up behind the castle ruins, in the only place that had trees that weren't someone else's olive trees. I was tired from the lack of sleep caused by the cold night and early wake-up by noises of the busy market across the street. And after a quick tour of the town and some breakfast, it was time for hitchhiking. I made a sign with the words Athens and Sparta in Greek. I was standing by a road leading to a roundabout where the first exit goes around Arapoli, with the second towards Sparta and the third towards Athens. A lot of cars drove by, but nearly all of them took the first exit. It took at least an hour for the first car to stop. It was this small, quite old, worn-out white car, and driving it was an older guy, around 60, who looked a little dirty, I guess. Greasy hair, some teeth missing, and big nose filled with visible blackheads. He didn't really speak English, but I could understand that he was going to Sparta. I was a bit frustrated by the fact that pretty much all of the cars were going towards Arapoli, so I thought this might be the only chance, and so I jumped in. We are trying to have a conversation, but without a shared language, it's pretty much impossible. We introduce ourselves, and I try to explain where I'm from. He smokes and offers me a cigarette, but I refuse it. We drive just shy of 6 kilometers before the guy suddenly makes a left turn, and we end up in his yard of all places. He stops the car, gets up, and signals me to follow, so I do. I take my bags and feel a bit confused. It's a small house on the mountains surrounded by sheep and olive trees. There's a dog sleeping in the sun, but it doesn't seem to be bothered by us at all. We walk to this balcony or terrace that surrounds his house. I put my bags inside of his house and join him sitting on the balcony. He lights up another cigarette and asks if I want to eat something or maybe take a shower. I refuse, and with the help of Google Translate, I ask why we aren't going to Sparta. He answers that I can sleep at his house and he'll drive me there tomorrow. I try to explain that I would like to get to Sparta or even to Athens today, so staying at his place isn't really an option. I'm pointing out that there's not that many cars going past this house, like one every 15 minutes, and only some 4 or 5 hours of daylight left, so every minute is valuable to me. He doesn't really seem to understand me, so I get up and I walk through the door to grab my bags. I put my backpack on and pick up my other bag. I turn over and see him inside. I try to walk out, but he stops me and guides me to the side. He then locks the door and turns to me. At this moment, I'm not panicking or anything because I assume that this is a form of hospitality and he's just doing this jokingly to offer me some food or whatnot. I keep saying no to him, but he doesn't seem to care. Now he's standing right in front of me and I'm starting to feel very disturbed by his presence. For some reason, too, I keep staring at his blackhead-filled nose. The image still haunts me, in fact. He opens his mouth and raises his right hand in a sort of loose fist in order to show me some blowjob motion. I'm still saying no to him. He suddenly grabs me by the crotch, though, and I can feel this cold tingling sensation shivering through my body as my hair suddenly stands on end. I keep saying no, and I start to raise my fist in order to hit him. We stand like this for a couple of seconds, and thank God he lets go. I'm still feeling the urge to hit him, but I don't. He asks, no sex, and I almost shout out no at him in a tone that makes it sound like I'm questioning the question itself. He then opens the door and I'm suddenly free. I walk out, feeling so creeped out by the experience. I walk past the dog to the road and I see 2 pickup trucks on the other side of the road. The trucks are surrounded by a group of hunters carrying shotguns on their shoulders. This makes me instantly feel a lot safer. I keep walking by the road for a while before a car passes me by. It's quite warm and I'm in the middle of nowhere, so I empty one of my water bottles and turn it upside down, showing it to the cars passing by, so they would think that I'm out of water. This works and the second car stops. Eventually I get to Sparta and later that day to Athens safely, but I felt disgusting until I got to take a shower. All the kindness I had experienced while hitchhiking before this event had made me too comfortable, I guess, and maybe I let my guard down or whatever. I think humans are good by nature, but probably trusting every stranger is a bit of a stretch, right? Stranger danger, in my opinion, is still overrated though. I'm quite a lean guy too, and not that strong, so I was lucky that the situation didn't end up worse. Though I do think that I could have beaten that also very lean shepherd grandpa. As a safety measure, I carried a knife with me too, but it wasn't on me at that moment of the incident. Also, the knife could have made the situation worse. Obviously, I wouldn't have done anything unless it was absolutely necessary. My mind was running like 1,000,000 miles an hour during and after this experience, and I thought about everything, how it could have turned out in the worst case. I thought about beating the guy, telling the incident to the hunters and calling the police, but in the end I ended up doing nothing and just sort of walked away. I hope karma gets to him eventually, but who knows. After this experience, I still think hitchhiking is the best way to travel, and I definitely am not giving it up, but I certainly am a lot more careful about how I do it. I'm from a small town that houses 3 different elementary schools, and only one middle school and a high school, connected by the gymnasium and a tunnel between the 2 buildings. I had lived there my entire life, and I went to a different school than most other people mentioned in this story. Now, back when I was in middle school, I had a litany of bullies who loved making every moment of my day a living hell. They did pretty much everything that you could think of, ranging from pranks in the middle of class to downright physical assault even. But all of them were nothing compared to this one girl that I met at the beginning of 7th grade, whom I'm going to refer to as Sadie. Sadie was a stereotypical mean girl in every sense of the word. Loved fashion, had a gaggle of friends willing to do her bidding, and every guy was into her or wanted her. She was the kid with the highest amounts of detentions, argued a lot with the teachers, and the principal pretty much did nothing about her actions. She also made a habit of having fun with some specific kids, which included me. I was a plus-sized kid at the time, a scaredy cat, gullible, and a bit of a pushover as well, but I did try to do well in school and I just kept to myself. But that didn't do much at all. As soon as Sadie took notice of me, she took it upon herself to make sure every time that we even saw each other, she'd make me miserable. At the beginning, it wasn't anything much. She started rumors about me, talking about me online. I didn't have social media yet, so I didn't find that out until much later. And in school as well, she said things, and threw things at me that ranged from her garbage to one of her textbooks. It wasn't terrible at first. Sadie was annoying, sure, but I had workarounds, so I just ignored her. But when other kids saw that I wasn't going to fight back, they joined in and took things way too far. Almost daily, I had been chased in the halls, ganged up on in the bathrooms, had my food stolen, gotten blamed by the teachers for their dumb actions in class, and many other things. These kids, they had me on edge and feeling practically worthless for the entire school year, to the point of me considering just running away to avoid the heck out of going to school. Why didn't I tell the school, you may ask? Well, I tried, dozens of times. Teachers, guidance counselors, even the principal. But they didn't care. The school was honestly not the best, and they were pretty negligent to everything that didn't involve funds, sports events, and GPA for the year. So they gave no heed to me when I tried to tell them what was going on with Sadie and her lackeys. These are some of their real responses from the incidents that happened, though. When I had gotten my backpack thrown down the stairs and a calculator inside that I brought from home got broken, "It's your property, your problem," is what they said. When Sadie had written a fat joke alongside of a slur on my locker door in permanent marker, you have no evidence that it was her. When Sadie's boy toy and his friends cornered me outside the changing rooms for gym to ask me for something, they were probably just kidding around. All of them were spearheaded by Sadie, who was practically in charge that year, and nothing she did was getting her into trouble. Summer could not come fast enough that year, and by the time the 7th grade was over, they let those kids get away with so much that I honestly gave up on trying to get outside help at that point. As I got some personal help that summer, I decided that things would be different by the time that I had to go back to school for the following year. I was not going to be Sadie's personal punching bag anymore, in other words. When 8th grade started up, I was ready. I learned some MMA self-defense, I defended myself vocally, I wasn't so quiet anymore, and I started to fight back. And, what did you know, it worked. None of the old bullies from last year even looked my way again. Except for Sadie, who still tried to pull her usual stunts. But the longer I showed her that I didn't care, the more it seemed to get to her. Honestly, it felt like ample revenge to all of the stuff that she put me through last year. Sadie, however, would not let it go for the life of her. I didn't know it then, but this whole act of hers would end up taking a really bad turn. One day, I was walking to the gym with Sadie following close behind me. She didn't share a gym class with me, but she did like following me around in between classes and trying to get a rise out of me. This day, however, was not great for me, and I don't exactly remember why now, but I was stressed out and I kept getting really ticked off over whatever went wrong that day. Sadie following behind, trying out different insults and comments about me, it must have just sent me over the edge. In a quick motion, I stopped walking, spun around, pushed Sadie backwards and spit towards her, with it landing on her leg. I told her to just get lost and to leave me alone. I didn't know what I was really expecting her reaction to be, but it sure as heck wasn't what she did. Sadie just sort of stood there, frozen, staring at me. I expected her to be coughing up blood from rage or her screaming or anything at all. But instead, she just stood there, as if a deer in the headlights. I didn't think about it at that time, as I left for gym not long after and eventually forgot about it. But after school, I was walking across the school building to head for the parking lot next to the high school building. Everything felt normal until I saw Sadie not far behind me. I didn't think anything weird of it, so I ignored it and kept walking. Until I noticed that she was taking the same path I was to the buses. This wouldn't be too odd, I guess, if she actually rode the buses at all. Sadie walked to and from school every single day. If not that, someone would always come and pick her up. But the carpool lot was in the opposite direction of the buses. I took a different path than my normal route, around the back of the school. I looked back to check and, yep, Sadie was taking the exact same path I was, and she stopped walking every time that I looked back at her. I began picking up the pace a bit, and from behind I could hear her running to catch up to me. By the time that I was nearing the bus lot, she was somewhere around maybe 10 feet right behind me, still jogging to follow me. I definitely did not want her to learn which bus was mine, nor did I want her to follow me home, so I decided to try and fake her out. I jumped onto a different bus, much to the dismay of the driver, and Sadie ran in after me. After she got in the front, the bus driver yelled at her about something, and I ran off and raced to my actual bus, which was all the way on the other end, where this particular bus was. I got in, and the bus drove away just as Sadie got off to see where I went. Now, the next day I didn't see Sadie anywhere at school, not in any of the classes, not at lunch, not even after school either. I asked, but nobody knew where she went. This went on for the rest of the week. The bus incident took place on a Monday, and the disappearing act happened on the Tuesday. By Thursday, I began to relax about the whole thing. I still didn't understand what Sadie was doing with the whole bus incident, but as long as she was gone, things felt, well, pretty okay. That is, until Friday afternoon came along. Like the last few days, Sadie wasn't there, so I was pretty relaxed for the most of it. When the end of the school day came, I was about to walk out of the front doors to the building when something stopped me. I just had a sudden horrible feeling in my stomach, telling me not to go outside. I had no idea where that came from, but I thought it was just my leftover anxiety playing tricks on me, so I headed out anyway, not still twisting. The middle school and the high school were all part of one connecting path system, which means that we all had hallways and walkways connecting both the main middle school and the main high school buildings, with one long sidewalk path out front. The parking lot where I had to walk to my bus was on the opposite end of this long sidewalk, which ran in front of both the middle school and in front of the high school too. This can make for a pretty long walk, and the doors leading into the high school, often flooded with students, make for some interesting obstacles. This would all come into play when this happened too. So I just walked down the outside stairs to the sidewalk when I saw someone run around a corner from the building. I look over and it was Sadie, looking completely ticked off, as bad as a rabid dog, full sprinting right towards me. I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my whole life, running off nothing but pure adrenaline and fear. Sadie was catching up quickly behind me though, and all I could do was run and pray for help. I dodged between crowds of kids and just tried to lose her somewhere in the masses, not caring at all if I bumped into other people, only afraid that Sadie was still behind me. By the time that I reached the buses, I didn't see her anywhere, so I stopped and nearly collapsed to catch my breath. I felt relief for only a second, until she popped out of nowhere from the side of the crowd and lunged at me. Sadie grabbed me by my hair and backpack, swinging me around in a circle as I tried to get her off of me. She kept pulling and jerking so much that I felt my hair being ripped out at some points, but she kept going. I screamed for help, kicking and punching blindly in Sadie's direction, but either nobody wanted to get involved or were too scared to break us up because there was nobody who came forward. Sadie let go of my hair to reach for something behind her, and what happened next was only a miracle. My older brother was walking out of high school drinking a soda when he saw the scene and ran to help. He was the only one who knew about Sadie and recognized her when he had gotten to school in the mornings. He threw his soda at Sadie's head, which startled her enough to let me go and drop whatever she was holding. I grabbed my brother and we took off for the bus, making it just before it drove off. After we found a seat, I looked back outside, and what I saw still gives me chills. Sadie was on the ground, arms pinned by a teacher, and right on the ground next to her was an open hunting knife. And I knew without a doubt that it was definitely hers because of the sound that I had heard when she dropped it earlier. Next Monday, I got a call down to the office where my brother was also waiting. We got pulled into the counselor's office where there were 2 police officers waiting. Apparently, after we ran, a high school teacher saw Sadie picking up the weapon and apprehended her while another person called the police. They got Sadie into interrogation and now they needed to hear what happened from me. I practically broke down right there and then and told them everything. What Sadie did to me last year, what I almost did because of her torment, the bus incident the week prior, and what happened on the sidewalk too. My brother, he put his arm around me while I just sat there nearly sobbing my words out. The police and the counselor just sat there writing down what I said, but they looked on sympathetically. One of the officers asked me if I would like to tell my parents so they could press charges. At this point, I just wanted everything to end about this horrible situation and to just be done with it, so I just told them to do whatever they wanted. I just wanted this to stop. The counselor could tell that I was already upset enough, so he sent me back to class and me and my brother made a promise to never speak about this again. Sadie ended up getting into juvie for the rest of the school year, all the way until halfway through the second semester of freshman year of high school. The school, it also had some changes to it too. Police officers were now on duty during school hours in the middle and high schools. We had stricter policies with bullying, and kids could now stay with teachers before, during, after school if they needed to. I never did see Sadie again after that, not even in passing in fact. I later learned from one of her old friends that after senior year, she dropped out to get her GED because the incident on her police record meant college was, well, impossible. It's been over 9 years since that day on the sidewalk, and I'll admit that this is honestly not as bad as what other kids probably had to go through, but I still feel the trauma from that time in middle school, and especially from what Sadie did to me. After middle school, I had developed depression, severe social anxiety, and PTSD from the bullies. I can't fully blame the situation for everything, as maybe if I just pushed a little bit harder with the teachers and the principal, maybe this wouldn't have happened in the first place, but eventually things did end up getting better. I just wish that I could go back to my 13-year-old self that had to endure all of that, to say that everything was going to be okay. I'm doing better now. I'm looking into therapy. I'm in university right now too, and I cannot be prouder of how far I've come. Thankfully, I'm doing better now, and I'm looking into therapy too. Also, I'm in university right now, and to be quite honest, I couldn't be prouder of how far I've come. My female friend came to visit me for a long weekend, and I, a 22-year-old female, won't be letting her stay with me ever again. We were friends for less than 3 months before we both moved to separate states and continued our friendship virtually until now. It has been a healthy friendship, I guess, with open communication. We have had our disagreements, but mostly always talked it out and moved on. They mostly revolve around her believing that I don't open up enough, and for me, she does things that are inconsiderate at times, like be jealous of my long-term friends, to their faces, and have an odd attitude problem at times. Only has been shown maybe 3 times, but still. She can also be a bit obsessive, and she gets upset when I don't text her for more than a day. She's got loads of my photos saved to her phone and remembers every little thing about me, and even has a list of my interests. And look, I know that's a bit weird, but I've seen it as endearing. That is, until now. So, the first day of the trip was great. She was bubbly and brought me a gift with a sweet note of appreciation. We went clubbing and headed to bed separately for the night. And this is where things got a bit weird. Now, remember, we slept separately. Well, I woke up and she was in my bed. But not in my bed. She was sitting upright on the top of the blankets next to me with her feet straight out and her back against my headboard while looking forward. I was startled and said, "Oh," instinctively. She just looked at me. She never said that she was waiting for me to wake up, or maybe she was uncomfortable on the couch. Nothing. Then she left my room. I have no clue how long she was actually sitting there for. Day 2. In the morning, we walked the city where she was engaged and wanting to hold my hand while we were out and about. By midday, still day 2, her attitude had shifted completely, and she is near mute now. She isn't conversing with me, enjoying any activities, or even smiling anymore. At the bar, arcade, or even at home watching movies. You know how those driving games take a sort of silly little photo for your profile pic on the leaderboard? I was blowing a kissy face in mine. I glanced at hers and even snapped a pic without her noticing. Her head was tilted forward looking up at the camera, and she was blank-faced, and you could mostly see the whites of her eyes. It was like the film poster of a horror film. See The Orphan 2009 for what it may have looked like. Anyways, for the rest of the trip, she continued to not smile. She was cold to every service worker. She responded with one-word answers, otherwise complained about any and everything. I asked, "Are you okay?" a couple of times, and she replied, "I'm fine," avoiding eye contact every time. Car rides were silent, dinners were silent. The final day, I drove her to the airport at 3 a.m. I asked if she enjoyed her visit, and she said it was okay, it was fine. I told her that I enjoyed having her. She boarded her flight and she left. Now, I cannot figure out what caused this 180-degree shift. I mean, I paid for everything, took her to all sorts of events that she wanted to go to, and even took a day off, my first sick day ever, to take her to more. I felt myself overcompensating because I felt insecure of being a terrible host or something. I've had several friends stay with me and express to me that they enjoyed themselves so much that they never wanted to leave. I don't believe I did anything so wrong to ruin this trip or whatever. When she arrived home, though, she didn't contact me, but she posted photos and videos of me captioned "mine" on her social media. I haven't brought this conversation to her yet. All of my family and friends believe that I narrowly avoided a Selena Yolanda, a Lifetime film situation, and that I was potentially with someone very unstable. What do you guys think? So I've never shared this with anyone except my wife and my mother. Growing up, we lived in an old townhouse complex. I always used to wake up terrified, unable to move anything except for my eyes, and there would be a man standing at the foot of my bed wearing a cowboy hat, arms crossed. He would just stand there and then he would be gone, and then I could move again. This happened to me from the ages of about 6 to 12 until we moved. Not every night, but probably maybe about once a month or so, I would say. I never told anyone about it for years. I just kept it to myself. In my early 20s, I was visiting my parents and finally told my mother about what used to happen. She was absolutely floored, and then went on to tell me when we lived in that house, it used to happen to her as well, for about the same amount of years until we moved and they bought the house that they now live in. I'm not quite sure how to explain the feeling of both relief and terror that I felt knowing that A, I wasn't crazy, and B, this man was also troubling my mother. My dad worked in a remote work camp and was gone 15 days at a time. This only ever happened when he was away. We talked to him about it after we discovered that we both had these experiences, and he thinks that we're nuts. Anyway, I just wanted to share this. I drove past the old house that this happened to me in, and even just being close to it, man, it gave me the creeps. I remember once my grandmother came to visit when we lived there, and I'll never forget that she just looked around and said, "This is a busy place." Another strange thing that used to occur in the same house is that we had 2 cats, and they used to just sort of sit at the bottom of the stairs and look up at the landing, like they were watching someone. The landing at the top, it overlooked the stairs, and I used to feel like someone was looking down at me when going up them all the time. The one cat that we had, he would just sit there sometimes for like an hour or more just staring. The bedrooms were on the top floor. Anyways, thanks for listening, and it feels good to have this finally off my chest. I'll also add that I had no other experiences since then. When we first moved, I was terrified that whatever used to haunt my nights would find me again. After all, the house that my parents bought, it was only about 2 blocks away. So I've spent about 2/3 of my life trying to debunk this one or come up with a reasonable explanation. When I was in 5th grade, I rode the bus with a girl who was a grade or 2 below me. We lived on opposite sides of a rather large apartment complex, but could still walk to each other's homes if we wanted to. Her name was Micah. Micah was born in Romania and had moved here a few years prior to me meeting her. She had heterochromia. Micah had brown eyes, but half of one of her irises was blue. This is relevant later. Now, her family was off, for a better word. I went over to her apartment a few times to hang out with her and remembered seeing a lot of unusual decor in her home. Lots of candles, a few altars, and a lot of taxidermy as well. Her mother would get very upset any time that she brought friends over, so typically she would sneak myself and a few of our other friends in anytime her mum was out shopping. My mother was pregnant at the time and often felt sick, so I never brought my friends over unless she was out shopping or at the doctor's or whatever, and so she had never met Micah. A lot of the other kids were scared of her or felt sort of uneasy around her, I guess. None of our mutual friends could explain why. I did too at times, I'll admit, for some unknown reason, but as a fellow outcast, we stuck by each other's sides in the end. After a few months of knowing each other, she started telling me that her family followed a belief system similar to paganism. I forgot exactly what she called their religion, but it wasn't Wicca or pagan or any other common one, for lack of a better word again, spiritual belief system. And Micah started claiming that she had special powers. I immediately called bull on this and told her to prove it, and she responded by saying that she would shapeshift into a cat and visit me later that evening. My family and I lived on the 3rd floor of our apartment building. There were no fire escapes, balconies, or anything like that. We barely even had window ledges. As a side note too, I do love cute stuff. Hello Kitty, Care Bears, My Little Pony, all that good stuff. My best friend at the time was very into fashion and loved to act like a high schooler, and the few times that she saw me in cartoon PJs, she made jokes. So I stopped wearing anything like that to school or sleepovers, almost a full year prior to me meeting Micah. I went to bed at my normal bedtime of 9:30, wearing some Care Bear pajamas that my mum had bought me a week prior. Nobody had seen me in them aside from my parents, and around 3 a.m. that night, I woke up to hear scratching at my window. I jumped out of bed, looked out of my window, and saw a black cat staring directly at me. The cat was sitting on the very thin window ledge and raised its paw at me, as if it was waving at me. Freaked out, I told myself that it was a dream, and so I went back to sleep, I guess. That morning, while my mum was cooking breakfast, she asked if I had heard anything weird outside the night before, so I asked what she meant. I saw the weirdest thing last night. I heard scratching at my window. I got up to see what it was, and I saw a black cat on the window ledge. It looked like it was trying to open my window. I sat there in silence, unsure of what to say. My mum continued. I was afraid it was going to fall, so I brought it inside, carried it downstairs, and put it outside. But you should have seen its eyes. It had one eye that was half blue. I've never seen a cat like that before. I instantly felt so sick that I couldn't speak or finish my breakfast. Not wanting to approach Micah after all of this, I stood off to the side away from all the other kids until she walked up to me. "Hey, Gloomy Bear, why didn't you let me in last night?" I was completely stunned. I could have died. At least your mum was nice enough to take me downstairs. I stopped hanging around her as much after that. Our building caught on fire a few weeks after all this happened, and we ended up moving a few towns away. I haven't seen or heard from her since then, and to this day, my mum still remembers that cat. She'll mention it in passing every few years and make comments about how weird it was that a cat could have gotten up on that ledge and was trying to seemingly get in like that. For the last 20 years, I've been racking my brain looking for any explanation as to how this could have all happened, but I just haven't been able to come up with one. So, if anyone has one, then genuinely, I would love to hear it. This all took place in the mid-90s in a little town called Ottawa in Kansas. These are all true stories of experiences that I had while living in that house. I'll be sharing these experiences in chronological order, but first I'll describe the layout of the house. So, from front to back, you walk into the den, and moving forward you enter into the kitchen with a doorway to your right that leads to a bathroom and a master bedroom. If you continue through the kitchen, it leads to a dining room and living room on the left. If you go through the dining room further to the back of the house, it leads to a doorless room that we used for a computer room, and then 2 more bedrooms in the back. I share all of this because, over the years, family members switched rooms. So, the first experience happened not long after moving in. At the time, my mum had started a new relationship and we moved in with him. His mum also lived there as well, and she had the master bedroom at the front of the house. My mum and her new boyfriend, they had the room at the very back of the house, and I was in the room next to them. Now one night, I heard all of my mum's music boxes just start playing out of nowhere. She had these painted clowns and such that sat on satin pillows and played music. They weren't creepy to me until this night, I suppose, but anyways, I hear them just all going off, and in my kid mind, I'm just sort of ticked off that my mum is in there playing when she told me that it was bedtime. But they just kept playing and playing, all at the same time. It was years later that she, my mum, finally told me that she wasn't playing with them. The second thing that happened was probably the scariest experience of my life. I was still in one of the back bedrooms, but by this time my step-grandma had moved out, so my mum and her boyfriend were in the master bedroom at the front of the house. I was alone in the back. I have siblings, but they were back and forth between my mum and dad, so at this point I was the only kid there. My mum and we had just come home from Walmart, and she had gotten me The Nightmare Before Christmas on VHS. And yes, I'm showing my age there, but it was late, so she and I could watch it the next day. I put it in my dresser and I went to bed. It was still wrapped in the cellophane and still in the Walmart bag. And as I was falling asleep, I heard the plastic of the bag. Even with my nightlight on, I couldn't see anything. I was scared though, so I gently tossed my big white cat Muffin Man onto the floor at the foot of my bed in the hopes that he would scare whatever it was away. And instead, he literally took off. I kept hearing the plastic and was literally petrified. I couldn't even scream, I was so scared. I eventually woke up, and when I did, the movie was now out of the case and on the floor. And honestly, I simply cannot explain how that happened. Now, the third experience, I had a friend over, and this story still gives her chills as well. She had recently lost her mum in a car accident, and this was another attempt of her sleeping over. She would try, but she missed her mum and just wanted to be with her family. But this time, she actually stayed the whole night. The experience itself wasn't scary for me, but I had a poster of The Crow. It was my first poster ever, and I loved it, but when I woke up, it was tacked upside down. I certainly wouldn't have done that to Brandon Lee, and when my friend saw that, she turned white and she never spent the night again. I know it wasn't her, and at that time my little brother was living with us again, but there's no way that he could have reached the tacks at the top of the poster like that, so again, I just don't know how this happened. Now, my fourth experience was probably the second scariest one. We had cats at that time, but one day, in the middle of the day, my brother was down the street playing football at the school and I was home alone with my mum. I was in the computer room and she was in the kitchen. The day before, my little brother had been pretending that he had caught an alien. He had a huge plaster E.T. piggy bank that was probably like 1.5 to 2 feet tall. It was pretty ridiculous really, but he had a rope tied around it because he had caught it, you know. So I'm at the computer and all of a sudden I hear a loud crash from the rooms in the back, and here comes my cat Jara, with the other end of the rope tied around her tail. Mind you, Jara was a tortie. They're kind of known for just being all around crazy, but for anything to keep that cat still long enough to tie something around her tail, well, that's kind of mind-boggling. But something had definitely tied it around her tail like that. I mean, it wasn't an accident, there was a bow and everything, and broke off E.T.'s head in the process. Again, I cannot explain any of these experiences. My mum ended up having a priest come in and bless our home. He stole my stone collection and Dreamcatcher. Still pretty ticked off about that, by the way. But we did a little bit of research and found that the property had actually burned down in the past. I cannot remember the dates now, but I don't think that the spirit or whatever it was demonic. I actually think that it was a little girl named Margaret. But I'm curious as to what everyone else thinks. I'll do a little bit more digging and see if I can find any more info about the fire, but yeah, really at this point, that's all I've got. I was 11 years old when this happened. I'm female and currently 24. I was visiting my dad and stepmom over the summer in Saskatchewan, Canada. My dad worked long days during the week, so on her day off, he planned for my stepmom to take my sister, 8 at the time, and I out for a day to get some bonding time in with us, as we didn't know her super well yet. She took us to get our nails done, to the mall, and on the way home we stopped at a McDonald's. We planned on eating inside the restaurant, but it was very busy, so my stepmom asked my sister and I to find a table and wait there while she went to the counter to order our food. It was around then that I noticed this rough, older-looking woman, possibly 60s or 70s, looking towards the direction of the table my sister and I were seated at. All I could remember is thinking, she looked like a drugged-out Susan Boyle. She looked possibly homeless and addicted, so I didn't give her much of a thought, letting her do her own thing, and I just tried to talk to my sister about random stuff. Once my stepmom came back to the table, this woman was also seemingly already approaching us, and then stopped beside us. She just said hello, so we all kind of said hi back and tried to ignore her. She asked if we were my stepmom's daughters, so she says they're my stepdaughters, trying to be simple to kind of shut her down. The lady says that we were beautiful girls, and begins to walk towards the door. She stops one last time and asks, how old are they? We had the impression that she was on her way out, so my stepmom just says to her, like, 11 and 8. Her eyes, though, they lit up, and she looked at me with a sort of strange look. I've always wanted an 11-year-old, she said. I'd buy her from you. That definitely crossed a line, so my stepmom finally tells her that we're trying to eat lunch and asks her what she's even saying in a somewhat aggressive tone. The lady got one last look at me, and then she finally left. She definitely didn't have the money to buy me, even if I was for sale anyway, so I wasn't too worried. But I do think that she was possibly on some drugs and not in her right mind. But knowing my shy self at 11, I wouldn't have known how to get rid of this lady if she had tried to talk to us without my stepmom there. We weren't super close then, but I respected her a lot after that day for being ready to protect us, even in a minor situation like this. This actually happened just last night for me. I was almost home after a long day of traveling, and it was approximately 1 in the morning as I rounded a corner and stopped at the intersection right near my home. The light was red, and as I slowed to a stop, out of the corner of my eye I saw 3 people on the sidewalk. They were all dressed in black and wearing white face masks or face paint or something, maybe a combination of the two even. One was crouched on the ground, while the other 2 were standing crooked. They were still as statues when I came to a stop, but when I looked at them, they all started crawling or walking towards me. I was absolutely exhausted at this stage, and apparently my instinct in moments of terror is to just laugh and shake my head like I was in on the joke or whatever. They were super close to my car in the end, but thankfully the light turned green and I was able to get out of there before they reached my car. Since you could see the corner of my house from the intersection, I ended up just driving for quite a while and then turning around once it felt like enough time had passed, so that they wouldn't follow my car pulling into the street that I lived on. I imagine it was just some teens playing a prank or whatever, but afterwards I was thinking about it being a school night, and most people wouldn't be having sleepovers in the middle of the week or anything. I'm debating whether it's worth calling the non-emergency line to report it, just in case. Regardless, I won't be going out past sundown for quite some time, and I'll likely invest in some door lock reinforcements too after that, because honestly, who knows what they were up to. I've always been aware, growing up in a house of old-time Romani people gives you that. I say aware in respect of that, to quote Shakespeare, that there are more things in heaven and earth. There's places I've been where I'll never go again, and here's one of the last of them. I'm going back 30 years or more to a day in the summer holidays where I found myself alone. I'd walked my girlfriend home, and it was the time where the light starts to fade and the night starts to close in. It would have been around 8 or 9, I suppose. It was still quite light, and looking back there was no need to be worried about, well, anything really. But as is the case with many things, the worry, it started anyway. I took a shortcut through a park which led me onto a path that cuts through some woods. The light was good enough for me to walk the path and stay on through to the other side. I've spoken about the feeling of something watching you before with others, and if you take anything from hearing this, then it's that this feeling that you get is rarely wrong. Mine, in fact, has never been wrong. So, as I walked down the path, it opened up into a small field full of long grass, yellow-colored as the sun had been quite merciless with it. When that feeling, it just struck me hard. Now, I was at an age where I thought that I could have handled pretty much anything, so I stopped and surveyed around to see what or who was there with me. That's when I heard a sharp whistle, the kind where a dog may come running. I looked around to see where it had come from, but there was no one there. I just started to walk again, thinking that the whistle must have carried from the park or whatever. Then, I caught something from the corner of my eye in the grass, a streak of white, just slow enough for me to catch it. I whirled on the spot, but there was nothing there. I shout, "Hello?" No answer. So I carry on walking. I'm getting nearer to the far edge of the field now, and that's when I heard, clear as day, literally to my back, "You're not leaving so soon?" I quickly turned again, thinking that somebody was there, but there was nothing there, and no one. Fear is a funny thing, and the realization that you could be in trouble, coupled with fear, is a horrible thing. I've always been told from being very young that nothing can hurt you that's passed on, so armed with that knowledge, I just carried on walking. I was scared, but I hunched my shoulders with my hands in my pockets and watched my feet, glancing up for the gap in the fence to get out of there. Only, it wasn't there. I don't know how, but I must have turned around one too many times, and I must have threw myself off by quite a ways from where I should have been. And now I'm a little bit more scared. I am definitely not prone to irrationality, so this was not right at all. And it was then that, on the breeze, I heard a distinct laugh, or more of a chuckle maybe. I started to jog, this time keeping my eye line on the gap in the fence, and I fell down. I say fell because it felt more like I was tripped, but maybe that was adrenaline, I'm not too sure. Whatever the case may be, my memory gets a bit hazy there because in the dying light, I swear that I saw a man. Just an outline silhouetted by the setting sun. But he was there, dog at his feet with a long walking stick, like a shepherd's crook. I sat up, and for the first time in my life, I realized that my family wasn't as crazy as I thought they were. It's a humbling experience, really. And I bounced onto my feet like Jackie Chan, and that jog quickly turned into a dead sprint. I knew in my head and heart that I'd seen something that wasn't right, and I needed to get out of the way as fast as my legs would carry me. The very last thing that I heard, or thought I heard, was, "Don't be a stranger, lad." Like I said, there's places that should really be left alone, as the things there want you to come and visit. After that, even with my mates, hanging around on that park, I always felt watched. I'd look down that path and I swear that I'd hear laughter. They built some warehouses on that land eventually, so I suppose it's not somewhere to worry about these days. I still tell my boy about things like this that happened to me when I was younger, and he always rolls his eyes and sometimes laughs. And who knows, I might take him there one day and see what happens, just to see. This happened about 5 years ago. So I had just gotten out of a 2-year-long relationship, living in the city I moved to my then boyfriend for. After he left, I felt lonely and heartbroken. I was stuck in the apartment that we had shared, so I downloaded Tinder to chat to guys as a way of coping with the breakup. There I matched with this guy. He was about 4 years older than me. He was extremely handsome and charming. He was very much into fitness and had an amazing body. After talking for a few days, He asked me to meet, and so we did. He came over to my house, and I was immediately attracted to him. He was a bad boy type, the kind I usually fall for, but he was also very sweet in the way that he talked to me. He kept complimenting me and doing sweet stuff to me. And after a few days of meeting, we ended up having sex, and it was honestly the best that I'd ever had. I felt this intense chemistry between us. We started hanging out and doing it a lot, in fact. At the time, I did smoke weed a lot. I knew that he smoked too and did some other things as well. I didn't really care much at the time, but eventually, he would keep asking me to hang out pretty much every day, begging me to come over because he missed me. When I told him that I was too tired, he would bribe me with stuff like saying that he would give me massages, weed, dinner, romantic things, give me the best night, etc. He didn't like it when I told him no. He would sometimes get angry even, send me a bunch of messages just pleading for me to come over. After every time that I'd been to his house, he would shower me with love via messages. He was so romantic, saying that I made him feel so amazing, that there was something special about me and that he loved being with me. He would often shower me with compliments, but then get angry when I said that I didn't have time to hang out with him. Now, at some point I was at his house. He got a phone call from someone. After he hung up, he told me that I had to go upstairs and hide because his baby mama was coming over. He didn't want her to see me because she was crazy. He told me some stories of crazy stuff that she had apparently done, and I believed him. He was very convincing, and I believe that this happened twice. Now, I know that I should have seen the red flags. I probably did to some extent, but I didn't care much. I kept hanging out with him a lot, even though I figured out that he was heavy on drugs. And one day, I was at his house and we had done the deed. I had smoked a lot and he was on some stuff. He wanted to go again, but he got frustrated that he couldn't get it up. He got mad and kind of blamed it on me not being firm enough on the grip. He kind of yelled at me to squeeze it harder, and he just kept getting more frustrated. Obviously, I felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave, but he wanted me to stay. He tried to continue, but it just didn't work. I was extremely uncomfortable and felt very embarrassed. After a while, I told him that I wanted to leave. He then told me to give back the weed that he gave me, as is his mind. It was his payment to me being with him. And at that, I was absolutely furious, and so I just grabbed my stuff and I walked out the door. He followed me, and at first he walked calmly about 30 meters behind me, begging me to stay with him, asking where I was going, and I just kept walking and saying no. But he then ran towards me. I picked up my phone to call a friend of mine because I could tell that he was getting aggressive, and then I turned around and saw him literally tear his shirt open and began stomping towards me. He grabbed my phone out of my hands, then kicked me in the stomach so hard that I fell into a ditch. He then smashed my phone to the ground and told me, "You're done." I thought that he was going to beat me up at this stage, but then it looked like he was actually trying to contain himself for a second and just turned around and left. Obviously, I was mortified by what he had done. I ran away shaking. I can't even remember how I got home, but somehow I did. I was able to borrow a phone from someone and called my friend, I think, and he came over and I had bruises all over my stomach and legs, and I had no phone, obviously. It was then that I called the police using a friend's phone and told them that I wanted to press charges. A few days later, he messaged me saying that I tried to steal from him, that I took advantage of him just to get some weed. A few hours after that, he texted me saying sorry. A few more hours, he texted asking what had happened to me yesterday. Then a week later, he found out that I had reported him to the police, and he was mad. He said that he couldn't believe that I'd reported him. Then he told me that he would give me 2 new phones or whatever I wanted if I withdrew the report. That he wouldn't contact me anymore if I just did it. He just didn't want any trouble and didn't want to lose his daughter. I didn't answer. Then he sent me another message fabricating the whole story of what happened that night. He kept harassing me for weeks with messages. Some days he was begging us to get back together or to be friends, bribing me. Other days he was accusing me of random stuff, calling me names, etc. And that he had a great lawyer and that he would report me to the police for stuff that I had never actually done. He kept acting like a smart aleck, saying that he would beat me in court. It all became very chaotic in the end. After a few months, there was a trial as well. I couldn't attend physically, so I testified via a phone call. I was questioned about our relationship and the incident that night. He lied and made up stories about me, but no one believed him. As the trial was done, I received all the papers in the mail, and honestly, I was in shock when I read it. You see, he had previously been charged with violence and rape towards his ex. Apparently, there was also an incident where he had forced his ex-girlfriend to do things in front of other men and videotaped her. There were other girls too that had experienced similar things. Stuff like robbery, weapons, fights, violence and torture, you name it. He had been in jail multiple times as well, and I had no idea that I had been dealing with such a dangerous person. In fact, I'm pretty sure that he was a psychopath. He has no understanding of what he has done, and the sick part is that I recently came across a post about him on Facebook. Apparently, he's pretty popular with women lately on Snapchat and Instagram. He posts stuff about his life, whining about being beaten up by random men, being tortured and robbed and all that people follow him with guns allegedly. I've learned that the reason that he keeps being beaten up by people is that they know what he has done. He posted pictures of himself at the hospital to make people feel bad for him, and weirdly enough, they do. He makes women feel sorry for him. He says people lie and make up stories about him, and he gains pity. He then posts all the sweet replies and messages girls send him, saying stuff like he feels so grateful for all of their support. He's extremely good at manipulating people, and I honestly feel so lucky that I got away at the time that I did, and that it didn't escalate any further. I checked his Facebook recently too, and apparently he has a girlfriend now. I just pray that he doesn't hurt her in any way and that she gets out of there quickly, because Lord knows what that man is capable of. From the age of 7 to 12, I had a best friend called Aaron. He was playful, always cheerful, witty, and intelligent. His family, they rented a place from a relative of my brother-in-law. His family consisted of his parents, his sister, and him. We always hung out in the afternoons and on weekends. My cousin Aaron and I would get together, and it's worth noting that neither he nor his sister attended school. We were like the Three Musketeers, I guess you could say. Although Aaron was much more mature than us. Not in a bad way, but because he was very intelligent, knew about everything, and had answers for pretty much everything. Everything was normal too, and I have very fond memories of our mischief and games together. I remember that he taught me songs and words in a language that I don't know. He also drew strange pictures, and at his house, there were figures and something like an altar with similar drawings. But here comes the strange part. So, in the 7 years we knew each other, neither he nor his sister nor his parents seemed to age a single day. They remained unchanged. I also remember that once they invited me to dinner, and when he started talking about the moon and its power, his mother and father looked at him with a face as if telling him to be quiet and change the subject. His house was surrounded by a yard and had 2 entrances, the main one and one from the patio leading to the kitchen. At the age of 13, one afternoon, we waited for him to go out and play, but he just never showed up. So, not willing to give up, we went and looked for him. My cousin and I went through the patio entrance and heard him telling his mum that he didn't want to leave. And she said, "You know how it is. We could be discovered, you know that." And they continued talking in a mix of his language and ours. At that point, my cousin whistled and he yelled, "I'm coming." We went to play ball, and I was left wondering what they had been talking about. I waited for the right moment to ask him, which was in the late afternoon after the game, and he told my cousin and me something that we will never forget because his voice changed, and he became very serious. He told us that his family came from a lineage that didn't age normally like us, and that he wasn't really 13. Apparently, too, they traveled everywhere. My cousin jokingly asked, "Well, how old are you, 80? And he replied, 64. I got goosebumps from that, and from there, we each went home. The next day, we went around to see him, but his house was now empty, and there was no trace of him or his family anywhere. In fact, we never saw him in the town again. They just disappeared completely. The question of what really happened, I guess that will always gnaw at me. We all remain with this doubt, and to this day, everyone in the town remembers this kid, so it wasn't just a figment of my imagination or anything. Also, my brother-in-law told my mum that his relative rented out the place privately, but the father's name was Samuel Bassett or Bastide or something like that. I've searched on Facebook, Data's, Family Search, everywhere where I could find a record, and there is no record at all, anywhere, of this family. A little bit of context first. So I'm 27 and male. My parents are out of town for the weekend at a church conference of some kind. They're very religious, but I personally am not. I take care of our animals while they're gone, and I started a new job 3 weeks ago that requires my being there at 7 a.m. This has changed my sleep schedule to where I start getting tired at around 9 to 10 and wake up at around 5:45. My alarm clock is normally set to this too. I do have one cat of my own, and my parents have 2 cats and a dog. Our dog, Black Lab German Shepherd named Daisy, lapdog in a big body, is getting older and doesn't have the best bladder these days. So, I was awoken at around 1:10ish. I didn't look at the time, but it fits the timeline of the night, by Daisy panting at my bedside wanting to go out. I managed to get myself out of bed and downstairs. We have a back room area that leads to the backyard, as do my neighbors. I opened the back door to this area, turned on the light in a bit of a daze, and opened the door to let Daisy out. I came back inside to our kitchen and closed the door behind me. My cat enjoys eating while being pet, so I started petting him. The cat bowl is on a countertop that looks out into the right side portion of the backyard, a little bit of our neighbor's yard too because of the fence, and a clear view of their back room area. We use ours as a storage room for old kitchen stuff and trash cans. My neighbors, they converted theirs into a sort of mini lounge room. I began to get hungry at this point, so I got a bowl of cereal and placed myself next to the cat. Leaning over the bowl while eating, I stared out the window while I waited for Daisy to finish her business, and that's when I saw something. I saw a black figure moving around in the dimly lit, red light room of their back lounge area. At first, I genuinely thought somebody was robbing them. Then I thought that maybe I was dreaming. I looked at the time on the microwave and it was 1:16 in the morning, so I stared at it to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. And it moved really strangely, like whoever it was wasn't trying to forcibly enter, but spastically sort of flailing and moving back and forth. That's when my neighbor turned on the light to the back room and hobbled out. Her and her husband are older, and honestly, I couldn't believe my eyes. As soon as she turned the light on, whatever it was just gone. I've seen movies where the person sees a ghost, turns the light on and it's gone, but seeing it in real life is very much a different story. She looked around the room and then looked into her backyard. She turned around and walked back inside after, I'm assuming she saw nothing. But I think she saw something or heard something that made her want to check it out. In any case, I let Daisy back in after she had done her one bark to let me know that she was done. I put the finished cereal bowl in the sink and went upstairs to go back to bed. Before I did, though, I went to my notes on my phone to write down times, dates, and what I saw. I'm very tempted to ask them about it too, but some people are very, very freaked out by stuff like this. I told a past coworker about one other experience that I had, and they visibly looked distraught. I just don't really tell anyone about this unless it's brought up naturally in conversation, I guess. She is also not the best mentally and has recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And I don't know, this might just be a little bit too much for them. I just wanted to share this here with someone because I don't really have friends to share this with, and parents think that anything ethereal is demonic. Maybe it is, I mean, who knows, but it could also be their deceased father that passed away 2 years ago, or something else. In any case, eventually I went over to my neighbors to check in and see if they saw what I saw, and she said that apparently they didn't see anything. She said that she went out to turn off the heater in there, but doesn't remember looking around the room and into the backyard. I must have been in a dream state or something because, I don't know, what I saw looked just so real. I must have been imagining things, I guess, but I just cannot shake the feeling that I wasn't. I live with my wife in a home that we recently purchased around 6 months ago. I have never had an experience like this before, and I'm really not sure what I should do, if anything. So last night at around 3:45 a.m., I woke up suddenly, rolled over, and saw a 7-foot-tall dark silhouette standing over my wife's side of the bed. I flinched and jumped out of the bed, took my eyes off the being for probably half a second, and in the time that I had, it had disappeared. And I can assure you that there was nothing there that could have mistaken for what I saw, i.e. a coat rack or anything of the sort. It was dark, no lights were on, and I had just woken up from sleeping. However, my eyes were adjusted to the darkness, and whatever it was seemed far darker than anything else in the room, like a solid black, as if you drew a solid Sharpie figure on a dark grey piece of paper. The silhouette was very tall, had no details on its body or face, no hair, no ears, no impressions for eyes or anything. It looked three-dimensional, as I could make out a radius around the dome of the head and the neck. It had broad shoulders, as opposed to a lot of similar reports I've seen online. It looked slightly hunched over and was staring directly at me. I say this because it looked like it had a small forward tilt to its head. I saw its full body from where I imagine its knees were. Its midsection tapered slightly inward from the broadness of the shoulders, and from the waist down, it looked like the same. No gaps of shadow between where its legs would have been, as if it was wearing a cloak that sort of draped down to its feet. All a deep, solid black color. Like I said too, I looked at it for about 2 seconds before I jumped up. I noticed it immediately when I rolled over, but didn't understand what I was seeing until after a moment or two. I suspect my delayed reaction was due to the fact that I was asleep shortly before and had to get my bearings on what was happening. I have no idea what it was or what to do, and I remained awake for about an hour afterward before, eventually, I just fell back asleep from exhaustion. I wake up for work at 6 a.m. and go about my business. If anyone has seen this, or if you have any advice for how I should handle this, then really, please do message me. I mentioned it to my wife only that I saw something strange last night and that she should tell me if she sees anything odd in the future. I don't want to scare her, but it sure scared the heck out of me. This was in middle school. My teacher was absent one day, and this gym coach was substituting for him that day. I've seen him around the school before, and he has substituted for us a few times. I was sitting at my desk talking to my friend behind me and pretending to do my work, and for some reason, he decided to walk around the room to check if we were doing the assignment. So I turned to my desk and started writing. He goes one by one to everyone's desk, but slows down once he reaches mine. He hovers over me, just staring down at my work. I got a bit nervous because I didn't want him calling me out or anything, but for some reason, I felt his breath on me heavily, which was really grossing me out. He was a frail, old-looking guy, so honestly, I didn't think too much of it. He walked really slow and seemed harmless, but was sort of very passive-aggressive when he spoke to us. I'd always get this weird, sort of creepy vibe from him, but always thought that it was just me. Anyway, a few months go by, and the rumor of him being fired circled around the school. I was curious, so I'd ask around to know what the tea was. And apparently, the same teacher that would sub for my class was actually fired. He was caught trying to touch the girls during practice and throughout gym periods. He even touched a girl, which was soon reported by the student. And he even got caught hiding in the crack of the door trying to watch the girls change in the locker room. He would just sit there and try to watch them, apparently. He finally got caught while doing so, and he was soon fired and kicked out of the school. The news, it made it everywhere. Even on the news, it honestly spread like wildfire. Thinking back on it now, it gives me chills to think that he would watch girls change like that. And thank goodness that he got caught. I guess you just never know people's intentions after all. I'll preface this with a question. Do you ever get a sinking feeling of impending danger? Because I did, in the backwoods around Solomon Hill, Berkshire, UK. Just a feeling that the vibe of a place is completely rotten, when moments ago it was almost idyllic. So I got the weekend to myself, as my partner is away for a few days. Something that I like to do is go for night drives, and stop by somewhere in the sticks and go for a peaceful walk when not too many people are around. So I got in the car and put in the directions to a little car park in some woods about 10 miles away. As I drive down the motorway, the sun's very nearly set. It looked great, in fact, everything bathed in orange. I leave at the junction and the motorway becomes dual carriageway, which in turn becomes single B road. I turn off into the lane and pass through the last village before a nice bit of hilly conifer woodland looms large in the twilight. I was going here particularly because I heard that there was a nice viewpoint of Reading Town, but in the end, I don't make it that far. Now, I'm going up country tracks, single lane only, so I'll have to pull over to let someone past if they're going the other way. That doesn't happen. No one else is on the road, in fact. The hedgerows give way to the woodland. It's very pretty and I can still hear birdsong in the dying light. Eventually I reach the car park, although really it's just a patch of gravel for turning around, and a forestry commission gate blocks off the dirt track deeper into the woods. In the car park there's a motorhome, although it looks like no one's in it. There's also a dark blue Ford Fiesta EcoBoost with a fella in it on his phone. I park in the corner, behind the motorhome and 2 spaces over from the Ford and get out. There's a meadow across the road from the car park, so I walk to that to see if there's a path that may lead to the viewpoint. I've not been here before. No viewpoint, but there is a single deer, which was nice. After that, I cross over again and decide to use the track behind the forestry gate. Even if I don't find the viewpoint, it will be a really nice walk, I think, and begin walking. The man in the little car isn't on his phone anymore, and he gets out. I take a few more steps, but I'm already feeling a little bit creeped out, like a creeping dread is starting to shift in. I look over at the man. There's now a second man, and the pair of them are dressed in dark, practical clothes with boots. They're very tall. They don't say anything to each other. Their faces are made of stone, in fact. I've sort of stopped now. I pretend to be on my phone. I try not to look directly, but out of my peripheral I catch them taking turns to sneak looks at me. So I look at them directly, and one is just watching me as they walk towards the same path that I was about to head down. I just sort of stand there as they walk by, and they keep looking at me in alternation, even turning their heads as they're in front of me, now to look at what I'm doing. They disappear behind some hedges, looking at me one more time before they go. That dread feeling, the rotten feeling, is very strong. I've had this danger feeling only twice before. One time the danger was perceived, the other time very immediate. At this point, I decide absolutely not, and I go straight back to my car and I get in. I can see the men again, and from the car I can see around the bushes, and they just sort of stood there, watching me. The entire time I got ready and drove out of the car park, turning onto the road, they just stood there, watching. Now, I hope that I was just being paranoid, but I think I know the difference deep down. Paranoia makes you jump at your own shadow and feel anxious. This feeling was cold and a solid feeling in my gut. You become hyper-aware of your surroundings, but also the object of your dread, and in this case, it was definitely these men. I just had a terrible feeling about them, unlike any other stranger that I'd come across. But what do you guys think? Was I overreacting, or does anyone else get the feeling that I'm talking about? Have you had it before, and if you have, where and when? Something about those men just wasn't right, and I'm really glad that I listened to my gut. This happened last summer when I, female and 18, was 17, went out with a friend, female and 19, at the time she was 18, for a stroll in the woods. We live near a big forest. So when leaving the forest, I kind of noticed that something was just off. So I turned back and there was a really tall guy, almost 2 meters, standing right behind me, only leaving a little bit of a gap between me and him. He looked very pale, had blue shorts and white stripes on and a dirty white top. He had pretty big and dark eye bags, blondish white hair, and looked like he was in his mid-20s if I had to guess. I instinctively took a step back, and my friend, out of panic, did the same. The guy stood still and asked us if we were interested in doing, well, you can probably guess, and if we were lesbians, and that he would have some nice friends at his place. My friend, thank God, told him friendly enough that we weren't interested, and the creep turned back without saying anything and left the way that we took to get out of the woods and walked back in. We took separate ways to get home instantly because of both of us being creeped out. I told my older sister when I got home, and her face turned pale while I was telling her. She asked some questions about the guy, and she told me that this guy sounds like her stalker from school time. Apparently, this guy lived in a little village that was near the woods, and to this day, I've been way too scared to go into the woods there again, even if it is with my friends. I just hope that I never see this guy again in my life, and I also hope that he stays away from my sister. Many years back, I dated a man-child, relatively the same age as myself. We got along pretty well. He presented gentlemanly, hospitable, kind, and loving. In hindsight, things escalated quite quickly. We went from being friends to being exclusive within a month. Not enough time to truly know someone, I know that. This story is quite lengthy, and I'll do my best to shorten it without leaving out integral details. So please, do bear with me. We saw each other daily. We mostly hung out at his home. That was fine with me in the beginning, as I'm rather introverted anyway. A couple of months into our relationship, I started to question why we weren't leaving the house, why we weren't going out and experiencing new things and trying out new hobbies. His responses were always cloudy. He always tried to redirect the conversation, thinking that I was truly stupid and couldn't tell that this was an obvious avoidance tactic. That was the point where I started to become curious though, and from there it all went downhill. Now, I'm not an intrusive person by any means, but considering that he was my partner, I had a right to inquire as to why we were isolating ourselves like this. After some mild questioning for a few weeks, I noticed that he began to create distance. This noticeable change was hard to ignore, in fact, and pretty much confirmed my suspicions. However, I'm not going to make a decision based on assumptions. I'm ashamed to admit this too, but one night while he was sleeping, I actually went through his phone. I still feel pretty disgusted, even though I found like 100% proof that I was the side chick. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. I was with this person daily, and it obviously confirmed why we were so confined to his home. But it was perplexing because she had no idea about me. It was about 2 a.m. when I looked through his phone. There was nowhere that I could sleep beside him for the remainder of the morning, so I quietly got out of bed, collected my things, and I went home. The next day, I believe that he realized what had happened. However, he never contacted me to see why I left. Things remained silent for the entire day, and then I received a phone call later that evening. I confronted him. Again, I'm ashamed to say that I did take photos of the evidence, as I knew that he would try to gaslight me. The fury in his voice, though, was palpable. He did what a usual abuser would do, and blamed me for going through his phone while totally ignoring his infidelity. It was utterly pathetic, really. He had created this delusion that I was going to contact the other girlfriend and tell her all of the wrongdoings, all of his infidelity, lying and cheating, etc. I would have done this. However, while I was looking through the phone, I realized that this girl was very sheltered. She was completely oblivious to what was going on, and I was afraid that he would retaliate against myself and her, and I thought to myself that eventually she would find out anyway. I do regret not informing her. However, my decision was my decision, and I can't change that. But this is where my nightmare begins. He was so paranoid and confident that I was going to contact his girlfriend that he would constantly call me daily and make vague threats against me. I persistently advised him that I would not contact her, that it was none of my business, that she would eventually find out that he was a deceitful, inept brainworm sooner or later anyway. All I wanted was for him to leave me alone and to never speak with me again. That was really my only request. He obviously didn't take my words well, and he continued to harass me. Only a few days later, things completely erupted. His paranoia exceeded levels that I'd never seen before. He sent me a threatening message with the context being, "I have compromising photos of you and I'll release them," as he believed that I would ruin his relationship. I couldn't believe the delusion. No matter what I said, no matter how I phrased it, I even had my mother speak with him at one point, but it was useless. I sent him a message stating that if this was true and if he messaged me again that I was going to call the cops. 5 minutes later, I received 11 messages in succession. A few were videos, photos, and personalized animations of myself. I had never seen these images or videos and animations before. These were taken without my consent. These were extremely intimate and compromising too. Unbeknownst to me, he had cameras set up all around his room. These weren't just threats. These were screenshots of these images, videos, and animations uploaded on various sharing sites. Luckily, he lacked intelligence. He sent me the evidence. There was nothing that I could do to stop the uploads, but I immediately went to the police. They did manage to take some down. However, there were no promises, as once a photo was uploaded, it could be immediately archived. This has forever altered my life too. I don't see relationships the same. I cannot be intimate. I can't form strong bonds. I've become apathetic. I'm forensically observant. I have difficulty trusting everyone, even my family, and so much more. In conclusion, the police were rather efficient and treated me very well, which I'm thankful for. I was granted an immediate protection order, family violence order as well. He broke that quite quickly and called my phone trying his best to apologize, begging me to drop the charges. He was so pathetic that he got his mother to ring me and tried to persuade me. I immediately called the police again and they took immediate action. This ended up going to court and I won. It's really not the result that I wanted. However, he did get his name on that good old sex offenders registry list, which is far more egregious than people may think. Nevertheless, this is beyond life-changing, and to all who may have gone through this, I'm really sorry for you and I feel your pain. Thanks for listening to my story. I know it's a bit long, but I hope that it was good and I hope you got something out of it. I guess the moral of this story is to be careful around people who you think you trust. I know that that's quite nihilistic and pessimistic, but these are some of the unfortunate aspects of life. It's quite paradoxical, I know. Humans are social creatures, but many humans, like this guy, are just absolute rats. So, to start this off, I was deployed to Kadena, AFB, late 2023. I was put into on-base lodging along with another body. After working my shift, I went straight to bed. I was asleep for a solid 4 hours until my roommate woke up to shower. I sleep kind of light, so it did wake me up. At this time, it was probably about 4 in the morning, after checking my phone. He apologized for waking me up, but I told him not to worry about it and to have a good day as he left. At this point, I shift my position and brought the covers over my shoulder. Then, shortly after, my blanket that had been over my shoulders was suddenly pulled back down. I was just about to fall asleep when that happened, so I was still fairly awake, but I ended up texting my buddy, who is an E6 tech sergeant, about what had happened, and he was freaked out for me too. He couldn't believe it, but he knew that I wasn't lying. I then called my wife, since she was awake in the States, to tell her my experience, and she didn't like it at all. She was sort of in disbelief, but also knew that I wouldn't lie about anything like this. I've heard stories about being here and it being haunted, but I never thought that I would ever experience anything like this. And it just had to be one of the freaky things that no one wants to experience, right? To those who have listened to the story, thanks for listening, and for those who have been stationed there, do you have any stories that you want to share? Because I would like to know your experience also, and know that I'm not alone. This was over 10 years ago, but I'll never forget it. So my friend, male and 18, and I, male and 17, would always hang out, either skateboarding, playing video games, and smoking weed. We were still young enough that we were hiding it from our parents, and would go out on walks or to nearby forests to smoke. One evening, it was about 6 p.m, and we decided that we would go to the nearby forest to have a smoke. This forest did have some walking paths, and a really cool man-made stair set that was embedded in the dirt of a really steep incline. There was even a long railing made accompanying the stairs. When we arrived at this stair set, it was about 7 p.m, and there was still lots of light left outside. We decided that we would sit at the top of the stairs for our smoking spot. We were chatting, smoking, having a good time, just sort of hanging out. After we had smoked a bit, we remained sitting at the stair set, and we both got pretty quiet. Not for any particular reason, but suddenly I felt or heard this indescribable boom. It caught me off guard. However, what really scared me was the fact that this feeling or noise seemed to come from every direction, including from underneath the ground. I remained silent for a moment afterwards, absorbing what I had just experienced. I looked over at my friend and asked him if he felt anything too, trying to confirm if I was just high and imagining things. But he confirmed that he experienced it too, and at that, I felt my stomach drop a bit. As we were discussing the sound, we didn't notice that within about 5 minutes that the whole forest had been shrouded in fog, and it was beginning to get dark. This was pretty strange, we both thought. Considering what we had just experienced, but kind of played it off as my friend went to smoke again. Just before he went to light his bowl, though, there was this shrill or scream that shot through the forest. It sounded relatively distant, but close enough to make us freeze. The The scream was long, high-pitched as if a woman had screamed, and echoed everywhere. Again, we heard the scream, and louder and more distinct this time. Finally, there was a third scream that tapered off, and then it just went dead silent. We were surrounded by fog, and it was getting darker and darker all of a sudden. And so at this point, we decided that that was enough. We got up, packed up, and we left, both being very uncomfortable with the series of events that had just taken place. We got out of the forest, which takes about 20 minutes or less, and when we did, there was no fog to be seen anywhere. In the following days, we played off the whole experience and didn't really talk about it too much, chalking it up to a weird experience at most. We ended up losing touch with each other later on, and we ended up getting back together several years later for his wedding. We ended up losing touch with each other later on and also ended up getting back together several years later for his wedding. And it was then that I brought up the experience to him, and he remembered it just the same, and we both kind of laughed about it, I guess. It still gave me chills talking about it, and having the confirmation that we both experienced the same thing was very unnerving. But as much as the screams were strange, I'll never forget that boom and the feeling and the noise of it. It felt, I don't know, otherworldly. My entire life I've lived in haunted houses. When I was 6, we moved into this nice 6-bedroom house built in the 1900s in the suburbs. When we first moved in, we didn't make a lot of effort to clean out the 2 crawl spaces. We basically just moved more stuff in with it, really. My mum remembers lots of old dolls being in there, though. I wonder if there's an attachment to something left behind, because I never found much information about anyone who lived there. Anyway, it was me, my aunt, my mum, my dad, my grandpa, and my cousins living there. Through the kitchen was my grandfather's room. Through his room was the stairs to the attic, which was enclosed in an L shape. The attic had been converted into 3 bedrooms by this stage. The room at the top of the stairs, that was my room with the tiny door to the first crawl space. To the left was my aunt's room, which had another crawl space. To the right was my parents' room. And sleeping in that middle room was honestly hell on earth. It was really scary, and most of my friends wouldn't stay over because of the things that happened in my room. I thought that I was just having nightmares or something because I'd always see a shadow figure beside my bed, but that turned out to not be the case. So once I was playing school with my cat in my room, and it was getting hot, so the attic was very warm. I went into my aunt's closet with the cat because I was pretending that he was in detention. The door had no lock, but for some reason it just got jammed and I couldn't get it open no matter how hard I tried. Me and my cat, we would have died in there for sure after a while because of the heat, but my grandpa came to the rescue and he let me out with no struggle. The rest of the house was bad too. I've been in plenty of haunted houses, but this house gave you a sense of, I don't know, like dread. It felt very menacing and evil. A lot of bad things were happening in my family at that house too. I always felt like the house fed off the negativity as well. My cousins would party and have 20 people in their room every night. My parents and my aunt fought about it a lot, and once I had to hide in my parents' room while my half-brother's mum tried to distract me because the party guests were threatening each other with guns outside. The basement, it was creepy too. My dad finished one side of it and turned it into a sort of home bar. My grandfather had antique statues of clowns down there, and we had a projector down there as well, and the PS2. I would sit down there sometimes and play games. Once the lights turned off on me, I would always run upstairs with this feeling of being chased. Eventually, my grandfather got sick and passed away when I was about 8. My dad needed my grandpa's safe code to take out important documents, and for some reason, all of the adults thought that it would be a good idea to basically do a seance in the attic to try to get the safe code, like ghosts can just spit out numbers like that. So my aunt, my mum and my dad and me took our voice recorder up there. My mum was a member of a local paranormal society at the time, so we ask all of our questions, hear nothing with our ears, and then we walk downstairs. We plug the recorder into our computer and listen through the recording, but we didn't hear anything besides ourselves until the part where we were going down the stairs. Then, through our terrible computer speaker, we all hear what sounded to my mum like a laugh and to me like whoom whoom in this deep demonic voice, almost like a pig or something. My mum then said, no more recording upstairs, okay? The only not terrifying experience I had there was feeling someone petting me really gently while laying on my grandfather's recliner. A year or two later, though, we got a dog. I was still sleeping with my mum, but at this point my dad was always at the bar and slept in the living room. Me and my mum were in her bed and my dog was chewing on a bone at one stage, when the cast iron 400-pound bed frame started shaking violently. My dog's bone flew onto the ground after the shaking started. We called the dog up to the headboard and she came up and laid between us. The bed was shaking for at least a good minute. My mum said that the bone must have caused it, but even then it just made no sense. Later, she admitted that she just didn't want me to be scared, and we checked online the day after and saw that there were no earthquakes in the area, and nothing else shook anyways, so that didn't make any sense. Just the bed. One night the door was opened between my parents' room and my room, and my mum said that she saw a shadow figure go from the stairs to the crawlspace door. Years later, my parents split and me and my mum moved out and my aunt stayed. Her boyfriend, who was basically my uncle, passed away sadly. My aunt adopted his kids and they live there still, but my blood cousins and my dad have moved out. I eventually went back to visit them after he passed, and he had renovated a lot of the attic, and it felt very different. A lot less heavy, I guess. The entire time that I lived there, I'd race up and down those stairs to my room because I always felt chased. And my aunt asked me if I ever told them anything to scare them, and I said no and asked what she meant. I'm a good cousin after all. And then she said that both of the kids, they race up and down the stairs like I used to. A few months later, and my dad was thinking about this Komodo dragon print that he bought from some local photographer or whatever. He remembered that he left it in the crawl space, and he texted my aunt asking if she could find it. And when my aunt got to the top of the stairs, it was neatly placed next to the crawl space door. Mind you, no one had read her text or know where to find it. Heck, she didn't even know where it was exactly. I think about that house still, and I have nightmares about it, and the entity that I am absolutely certain lived in it. I don't think anything as scary as what we went through has happened since at that house. And while I'm not a Christian by any means, if demons are real, then I am certain that that's what this is. It was in that house, for sure. Before I begin this, just to be clear, I've never actually met this person. So this all started about 5 months ago, and it was quite a pleasant interaction, I guess. But it has slowly gotten worse and, well, just really creepy, I guess. Around November or October, I noticed that my wing mirror on my car had been put inwards. I park about a street away from my house, so I have a short walk to my house. My house is on a main road with one drive and my parents park in the drive. I asked my mother if this was her, as it was a thoughtful thing to do. She maintains that it wasn't her, and my father also said that it wasn't him. So I thought it was a kind soul or just a thoughtful person. After all, where I park, it has a lot of older people, and they always say good morning to me when I set off to work. This continues for months onwards. It's only recently stopped since parking away from that side of the street. But I asked a couple of older people on that street, and they said that it wasn't them either. At this point, I only wanted to say thank you, but I continued going to work and didn't really notice anything else until, well, the winter weather got worse. And in December of 2023 was when the weirdness continued, The frost kicked in and the snow started on occasion. Since I set off from work at about 7 a.m, it can be pretty frosty at that time, and I would need to sort of de-ice my car a lot. And about mid-December, I guess, I remember running late for work. It was around 7:15 in the morning, and I still had not de-iced my car, so I was doing a careful rush to my car as it was pretty cold and icy, only to get there and see that it had been de-iced for me. I was confused, a little bit happy, but also a bit shaken, I guess. It was a strange feeling, I suppose. Again, I asked my parents and anyone that I saw on the street if they had done it, but it wasn't any of them. My mum laughed and said, you might have a secret admirer. And honestly, it was like she was a fortune teller. The de-icing of my car happened a few times more on very icy days, and from January onwards is when it got strange to the point that I started parking elsewhere. About the end of January, start of February 2024, I saw what I can only describe as homemade food left on the top of my car. And no, don't worry, I didn't eat anything. I ended up throwing these away once I got to work, but I found this situation was getting beyond strange at this point. It was around this time too that the first letter or note was left. It was written in what I can only describe as doctor's handwriting. It was basically asking if I enjoyed being treated like, and I quote, the princess I deserve to be treated like. I brought this home, showed my parents, and they didn't like this at all. My dad said that he was going to start parking on the street and I can park on the drive for a while. I said that that would be a good idea. However, if this person was looking for my car, he would know which house was mine. My dad agreed, but also pointed out that he or she may have already been watching me and may actually already know where I live. He stated that the main thing was that me walking home from my car to the house at 8:15 p.m. I work 12-hour shifts. He said that this could be risky. He also stated that he would sort the situation out if anything happened. I questioned possibly going to the police, but my dad stated that they would just laugh at us without any proof. I knew that he was right too, so in the end we didn't really have anything. I didn't like the idea of parking back on the street, so I didn't. It's now April and I stopped parking on the drive a few weeks ago, and now I've started parking on a different street still close to my house. Nothing has happened since February, and I really hope that it doesn't, as it's starting to get worse and to escalate. So my question for all of you guys is, do I have a stalker? Or is someone just trying to mess with me? How do I catch this person in the act so I can figure out who they are? I'll try and answer whatever questions you guys have when I can, but if you guys could help me out, then that would be amazing. So I was 4 when we moved back to my dad's childhood home where he grew up. Let me give you the layout of the house for a better understanding. So the house had 3 bedrooms. My parents' room was directly in front of the entrance. To the left of my parents' room was my room and the kitchen, and just a few steps into the hallway from the entrance to the right of my parents' room was the bathroom and my brother's room. So, ever since we moved into this house, I always felt scared in my parents' room. And this, even though I love watching horror stuff, I don't get scared that easily. I can watch the whole horror movie by myself and could go outside in the dark alone, or could even sleep in my room alone without any fear. But if you ask me to stay alone in my parents' room, there is just no way in heck that I would. I have experienced many things in there, but these 2 stand out the most. So I was in high school and I came home and nobody was home. I went into my room, and from my room I could see half of the hallway, and then there is the blind spot from where I can't tell if someone went to my parents' room or to the bathroom or to my brother's room. And it was a small house, so I could pretty much hear every sound of the doors opening, and it was only one entrance. I could clearly see who was coming in and going out is what I'm getting at. Now, I was sitting on my bed texting my best friend, and I heard the entrance door open. I looked up and saw my mum coming in, and she stopped just before the blind spot, and she looked straight at me. We made eye contact, and she kept looking at me as if she was angry at me. It was weird, so I asked her what had happened. Did I do something wrong? She didn't reply though, just kept staring at me. And here I was thinking, oh no, did I mess up or something, and am I in trouble? And then she said, come into my room, and she went inside. So I got up immediately and went to her room, but when I did, there was no one there. I called for her, but there was no reply, and then I thought maybe she went to the bathroom because, remember, these rooms are in the blind spot for me, so I went to the bathroom. Mum, are you in there? But there was no reply. I then checked inside, and it was empty. Then I went to my brother's room, but that was empty as well. I called for her again, but there was no reply. Then I realized that if that was my mother, she would have replied to me by now. I mean, it's one thing if it was my brother who would be trying to play a prank on me, but not my mum. I went outside to see if she was home, and there she was, talking to my aunt on the front of the house. I went up to her and asked, did you just come outside? And she said, no, I came outside like an hour ago. I told her what happened, and she didn't believe me. A year passed by, and nothing ever really happened after this, but it was the summer, and one day suddenly the AC in my room stopped working. It was getting dark, so the technician said that he would come the next morning. I had no choice but to sleep in my parents' room, so their bed is on the right side of the door, and I placed my mattress perpendicular to their bed, so I was in front of the door, so I could see the hallway front of the kitchen, and the lights were off, but there was light coming from the outside, so it wasn't completely dark. The door was open because my mother has a bit of a phobia from her childhood that she can't sleep with the door closed. It was around midnight, I would guess, and I wasn't able to sleep. I was just sort of turning side to side, and by this time now, my back was facing the door, and then when I turned back, I saw my mother going from the kitchen towards the bathroom. I didn't think too much of it. I mean, maybe she left when I was facing the other way. So I waited for her to come back so that I could ask her to bring me some water on her way back. 10 minutes go by, but she didn't come back. Then I was like, did she really go out, or was I just tripping? So I got up to see if she was still in bed, and there she was, sleeping peacefully. I laid down. I was not scared at this point. Then I closed my eyes, trying to fall asleep, and then I felt as if someone stepped onto my mattress. I thought, oh, maybe it's Dad going to the bathroom, and of course, I mean, I'm lying down in the middle of the way out, so obviously he has to step onto my mattress in order to go out. So, no problem. I didn't open my eyes, and then his next step, he stepped right next to my feet. I could feel that my feet touched his feet, and then he stopped. Okay, it's dark, so maybe he's deciding where to put his next step so he doesn't end up stumbling upon me. A couple of seconds pass by, and he's not moving, so I just pull my legs up so that he gets the idea that he can move forward. After 20 or 30 seconds, I put my legs back to where they were, and I ended up touching his feet again. I was a little bit annoyed, like, come on, Dad, move. So I gently tapped onto the side of his feet 2 to 3 times with mine, signaling that he could move forward. But he didn't. And mind you, I haven't opened my eyes yet. I really don't know why I hadn't yet, but I just didn't. And if you ask why I haven't spoken yet, well, there is a bit of an unspoken rule in my family that when my mother is sleeping, you don't make a noise because she's a light sleeper and you could wake her up even with the sound of turning pages, and then she'll have a hard time falling back to sleep. We just feel really guilty if we end up waking her up, so we try to be exceptionally quiet. So after I tapped him, and he didn't move, I tapped again, not moving. Then I opened my eyes because I was frustrated at this point. And as soon as I opened them, I saw him going out of the room, and from the back I could only see his white t-shirt. Then I waited for him to come back, so that this time he could go back to his bed easily. I waited 20 minutes at least, and he just never came back. Then it hit me. I was like, wait a minute, and I turned on my phone's flashlight to see if he was in bed or not. And there he was, sleeping soundly, which means that whatever I was experiencing in this house, I had touched it. I quietly laid back down and pulled the covers over my face. I tried to calm myself down, collected my thoughts. I mean, it wasn't sleep paralysis because I was able to move my body the entire time, and I had for sure felt those feet. And now, to make sure that I wasn't dreaming, I texted my best friend that I saw something, just so that when I wake up the next day I could verify it. Then I prayed and eventually I went to sleep. Now, the next morning I tell my mother what had just happened, and I was only about halfway through when my dad interrupted and said it was just a dream, and I remembered the text that I sent last night. I pulled out my phone, looked up at the text, and it was there. I showed it to my mum. See, it says 12:30, which means that I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. After seeing the text, that is when my mother's face turned a bit pale. And I said to my dad that you yourself have experienced stuff like that. I expect at least from you to believe me. And my mother said, okay, tell me what happened next. I told her that I then saw Dad going out, and she said, wait a minute, but he wasn't wearing white last night. And well, we just could never figure out what happened that night. I still remember the feeling of touching those feet though, and it's something that I'll never forget. It was a cold, dark day in November. I was 11 years old and spending the night at my step-cousin's house. I absolutely loved hanging out with her. We always had so much fun together. This was supposed to be another normal day. But my step-cousin, her name's Katie, was 12 at the time and home alone when I arrived with my backpack. I was excited as we talked and planned fun activities for the next day. A bit of backstory about Katie. Her father had passed away a few years earlier due to alcohol poisoning in her bedroom, that same bedroom that we were supposed to sleep in that night. At the time, I didn't know that he had died in her room. All I'd heard was that it happened somewhere in the house. Her mother was extremely private and never shared details about his death. In fact, she almost never talked about him. Katie was devastated for years, and honestly, who wouldn't be, right? Something like that changes a person. I never knew what her father looked like because my uncle had just married her mum that year, and by that point I'd known Katie for about 3 years. Anyway, so I had just arrived at her house, and after a while, Katie mentioned that she needed to take a quick shower. I didn't think much of it, and I told her that I would wait in her bedroom. She headed to the bathroom, locked the door, and turned the water on. I was sitting on her bed when, out of nowhere, I heard a knock. It came from her closet, though. A loud, deliberate knock. I froze for a second, unsure if I just imagined it, but then it happened again, louder this time. My heart started racing as I stood up and slowly walked closer to the closet, but the closer I got, the louder the knocking became. And then, standing face to face with the closet door, I felt it. This overwhelming sense of darkness, like the air itself had turned heavy and suffocating. It was terrifying, and I couldn't move. The knocking suddenly stopped, but before I could catch my breath, I heard the TV in the living room turning on and off by itself. The house was pitch black except for the light in the hallway. I don't know why, but that made everything feel even more unsettling. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I ran out of her bedroom, through the kitchen, and into the hallway. When I stopped running, I realized the TV was off again, and the living room was now completely silent. I could still hear Katie showering in the bathroom, completely oblivious to what was happening. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring into the pitch-black living room. Suddenly, The TV turned on again, its flickering light cutting through the darkness. And that was when I saw it. The reflection of her father's face appeared on her baby picture, hanging on the wall across from the TV. He looked confused, almost like he didn't understand how he was there. Then he saw me. Our eyes locked. His eyes were pitch black, completely void of life or emotion. I felt an icy chill shoot through me as we stared at each other. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the TV turned off and he was gone. I was left standing in the hallway, shaking uncontrollably. My eyes were fixed on her baby picture, which now looked completely normal again. But then, in the corner of the room, I saw him. A man in a black leather jacket, standing next to the TV. His back was turned to me. He didn't move. He was just standing there quietly. I let out a quiet gasp and he heard it, and slowly he began to turn around. I started backing away and he started walking toward me. His eyes were pitch black and he had this twisted, evil grin on his face. His footsteps, they echoed through the house, heavy and deliberate, like he was a real person. I couldn't look away, and he kept smiling, kept staring at me with those black eyes, and I just kept backing up until I reached the bathroom door. I turned around and pounded on the door with all my strength, too terrified to say a word. Katie opened it, shocked at the sight of me. I was shaking so badly I could barely speak, but eventually I managed to choke out, "Your dad is outside." What shocked me even more was her reaction, though. She wasn't surprised. Terrified, yes, but not surprised. She told me that her mum saw him sometimes, too. We stayed locked in the bathroom until her mother got home. When we told her what had happened, she believed me without any hesitation. She even admitted that she had seen him a few nights earlier, smoking a cigarette on the balcony, apparently. She pulled out an old photo album and flipped a few pictures to him, and I immediately froze because it was 100% him, the man that I'd seen. The leather jacket, the short brown hair, the same evil, soulless grin. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I could feel the evil radiating from him when he came at me. He didn't want me there, and I wasn't welcome in this home. I will never forget that night as long as I live, and even now, many years later, talking about it still makes my skin crawl. I live in the Appalachia region of the USA, more specifically the foothills of the Blue Ridge. For 16 years of my life, a gargantuan hill, I wouldn't say it's a proper mountain, has loomed over me, offering many stories from the things that I have observed on it. While many things have occurred while on this hill, all the events that have spooked me happened after I crossed a certain threshold. You see, at the base of the mountain there is a cattle gate put there some 70 years ago. One side of the gate is open field, the other a dense forest. Once you cross beyond that gate, an immediate, all-encompassing silence surrounds you, so much so that you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. Though it is quiet, the air is filled with a certain buzz, like an uncomfortable electric feeling that it's hard to explain. Almost, though, as if the mountain is alive, or more so, restless, I guess. Now, one time, me and my younger cousin went hammock camping up on this hill as an adventure to close off the summer. We packed half a day's worth of food and some tools, and then we set out. Everything was going normally as we ascended the mountain, which was seasonally full of the sounds of small birds and cicadas. We set up a camp at the edge of twilight and got a roaring fire going, which we sat around to tell stories, ones about schools, girls, and other typical experiences young folk have. However, as I was midway through a story, I smelled something. It was a sickly, sweet smell. like that of spoiled pork and dead and rotting leaves maybe, and dirt. Whatever it was, it smelled horribly of dirt. In an instant, I was on edge, and my cousin must have noticed the look on my face because he too became paranoid, soon demanding to know what the problem was. Of course, I played dumb, pretending not to know what he was talking about. But that buzzing sensation that I mentioned before, it began to grow in my chest. And I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but I felt like I had to go on a walk. So, after convincing my cousin to go walk along a large downhill path that we had discovered earlier, we set out into the inky darkness. It was as if the buzzing sensation was driving me to go deeper into the woods, a call of the wild I just couldn't ignore. We started off, flashlights on, and began walking downhill, but there was a large fallen over tree in our way. We easily went over this, but there were more down that path. We crossed over tree after tree before a large, inexplicably horrifying barrier of fallen trees stood between us and beyond. My cousin looks at me and says, "We could seriously get lost out here, you know that, right?" Something snapped in me. That electrical feeling permeated into my very flesh, and I smelt that horrid stench again. At that, I turned tail and began speed walking back to camp. It was certainly time to get the heck out of here. I started to run, and I felt as if something was behind me, a force pushing me faster, telling me to get out. My cousin running alongside me asks why we're running, and I say my intuition says that we should. We make it back to the camp and everything feels safer. I calm myself down, but that's when I notice that the cicadas and the crickets, that they've gone silent. In fact, the whole forest is all of a sudden dead. Well, we slept in our respective hammocks that night, and thankfully no cryptid got us, but man, I don't know what was going on up there, but something seemed close. It was around 2007 when I had an eerie experience that I still cannot fully explain. I was in my room, playing my favorite video game, Risen, when I heard the doorbell ring. I didn't pay much attention because my friend went to answer it, but after some time the bell rang again, and my curiosity grew because if she went to get the door, why is it being rung over and over? My friend later came to me, visibly shaken, saying that she had seen something paranormal. I didn't believe her, and decided to check for myself, but she told my mum too. We lived on the 5th floor of an apartment building, with stairs just outside of our door. When I peeked out, I saw a woman in traditional clothing, a blue and white Solwa kameez, standing against the wall on the stairs, a foot from my door. Her face and her feet were hidden. It wasn't frightening at first, but the strange part was that whenever I opened the door, she just wasn't there. Yet when I closed it and looked again through the peephole, she reappeared. I checked the keyhole for tampering, but no, it looked clear. That's when fear set in, and I locked the door and returned to my room. But the air felt colder and my room looked darker all of a sudden. The bell rang again, repeatedly. My mother ignored it and asked us to ignore it too, which only added to the tension. My friend, out of curiosity, checked the keyhole and later claimed that she saw an eye dripping with blood staring back at her. I found that hard to believe, but the strange occurrences had me questioning everything. We eventually called security. The guard didn't find anyone, but did discover an airtight plastic bag filled with water near the door. We had no idea if it was a prank by a neighbor, but it definitely unnerved us further. Thankfully, the bell ringing stopped after that as we kept ignoring it. Now, the next day I checked the keyhole again, and at first there was nobody there. But when I checked once more, the woman was back in the same spot. At that moment, I realized I was being toyed with. I decided to stop looking and avoided the door after that. A few days later, there was a power outage. The apartment was pitch black, so we lit some candles. My mother had to run an errand, and she took my friend with her, leaving me and my younger brother alone. A short while later, we heard someone trying to open the door. The doorknob was twisting as though it was locked, but the door wasn't locked. It was just closed. Panicking though, I quickly held the door tightly and shouted to ask who it was. There was no reply, and eventually the doorknob stopped moving. When my friend returned, she said that she had heard me screaming from the third floor as she was climbing the stairs. That night passed uneventfully, but I began noticing strange sounds, like toys being dropped or rolling, coming from the floor above us. When I brought it up with the neighbors upstairs, they claimed that they didn't know what I was talking about. Even after moving houses, the strange sounds continued above me in the new apartment, always around midnight. And something else started happening too. I'd occasionally wake up with thin scars on my back near my spine or on my hands. I never paid much attention to them at the time, but looking back now, I can't help but wonder if they were connected somehow. I have since accepted the existence of supernatural activity to be the work of jinns, and now that I look back on it, thankfully they were not the dangerous ones among their kind. If anyone's interested, then Google up jinn history or search about them. Otherwise, here's the spoiler. So, there are different species here on Earth with humans. They have their own dimensions and are created with smokeless fire. Christianity refers to them as demons, but Islam gives us more details. There's details from outside religion too as well, but that's a whole nother story. In any case, I truly believe that what we experienced was a jinn or a demon. So this story starts as me being an 8-year-old in Glendale, Arizona, and lived in a decently sized home in the ghetto with my mom and little sister. And honestly, maybe I was just stubborn or just didn't experience anything up until this point, but I swear that I didn't feel or see anything until my older sister and her 4 kids at the time moved in. We had a spare room for them since my little sister refused to move out of my mum's room. So, they move in and a lot of weird stuff would start to happen. Like, for instance, our soccer ball in our backyard randomly heard being kicked, or the ball could be heard hitting our wall outside, and from time to time you could hear someone on the roof running back and forth. And one night, everybody was in the house and we were awakened to a scream in my sister's room where her and her kids all slept. We quickly go in there very concerned. Come to find out, my nephew was locking himself in the closet to talk to a little boy. He was probably 3 to 4 years old at the time, so it was haunting to hear this. But he said something very interesting that later broke my heart a bit. My nephew told us to check the roof and we would find him. We surprisingly went and checked the next morning, and I was sent up there because it was easy to pick me up and have me climb through the roof to see what there was up there. There was nothing up there but a shoe, a red Lightning McQueen shoe, and it was of a young kid for sure, just a little smaller size of my own at the time when I was 8. I threw it down to show my mother, and no one said anything, they just kind of ignored it. But here's where the closure comes in. So my mother calls the landlord one day to make her call to pay rent and to discuss things in the home that needed to be fixed. When this lady and her husband came over to look at the stuff that my mum claimed needed attention, my mum, with no hesitation, asks them, "Has anyone ever died in this home?" And the homeowners say, "I don't know, why?" And so my mother tells her everything about the childlike behavior and the interaction between my nephew and being in the closet and all that. The couple, they look at each other and both look back down looking really sad. And they say that They apparently had a son who was really sick and battled some type of sickness and passed away in the home. My mum showed them the little Lightning McQueen shoe, and they were in such awe that we had something like that, and so they respectfully took it. It's kind of crazy to think about, but after that day, that little boy, he never bothered us again, and we never picked up on any creepy stuff after that day as well. This is just one of the interactions that I've had with the paranormal. There are plenty of other stories which I hope to share soon, but this one has always stuck with me because, well, it is just a really tragic story. I've been haunted since I was 11. A little girl in a white dress with long black hair, she would paralyze me around the time that I started experiencing a lot of negativity in my life, with addictions and verbal and physical abuse. I also forget traumatic events very quickly, and from my own investigations, it wouldn't surprise me if I have amnesia related to some deeply traumatic events. But anyway, this little ghost girl, she returned in 2022 with direct touches and movement of objects in my house, car. Wherever I would go, she would also be. I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but she cannot touch me in running water. And this tells me that it's a negative entity. She paralyzes me consistently every April, which is the date that she made physical contact with me in 2022. I initially thought that she was friendly. When she met me, I was in a mostly mentally ill state of my life. I was isolating myself from society, basically living in the woods, and that's where I met it. I became very attached to her. On contact, I could suddenly hear a separate voice that felt as if my own mind voice was being temporarily hijacked, though. There were a few love-bombing moments of incredible unconditional love being beamed at me when I was in an almost, self-deletion, depressed and hopeless state. I told her that I want to marry her while I was in a shower. She couldn't touch me at the time, running water, like I said. And now, I think that I really messed up. Ever since then, she's mostly hostile, has injected intrusive thoughts into my subconscious since last April, and it was so intensely disgusting that I couldn't function around human beings without being bombarded by intense visual and verbal, really illicit images and violent thoughts against myself and anything in my field of vision. It also hasn't stopped. Also, every April, she paralyzes me and returns in her form of a white dress with long black hair. But now she's grown up and looks my age. Whenever this happens, my head shakes violently, something like in the Exorcist movie or whatever. Multiple times of hallucinations where she shakes the heck out of my paralyzed body, making creepy zombie noises or saying my name with a nice feminine voice. Honestly, it's killing me too. She now seems to be able to take over my muscles in my body and move them if they're relaxed. And honestly, I just have no escape, no relief, which is why I'm here. What can I do? I'm wondering if this is just a different entity taking on the mask of a little girl that haunted me as a kid, or if the positive unconditional love experiences were a separate, less hostile entity that simply left me with this creature. Honestly, I have no idea. But what would you do in this situation? By the way, this is not mental illness. I've had other people witness poltergeist activity with me, so I know that I'm not going crazy. So, does anyone here know of any good places where I could find out some information, or maybe even get some help? About a few months ago, my fiancé, male and 27, and I, female and 24, were upstairs in our bedroom. Next to our bedroom is a spare bedroom that my fiancé and our roommate, male and 24, use as a bit of a man cave or gaming room. At that moment, our roommate was in the room gaming, while my fiance and I were watching a new K-drama on Netflix. This K-drama was about a guy who was a fake shaman, and he tricked people into believing that he was real with the help of his sibling or friend. I cannot remember which it was, but long story short, I started to pass out, and I looked over and saw my fiance passing out as well. Now, all I remember was screaming. It sounded like the depths of hell, to be honest. Screaming people, and I was petrified. All I saw was black, and I felt the ground under me shaking violently. The screaming was so intense that I swore that I thought that I was dead and I was in hell. The screams sounded like people burning to death. Even sharing this after a few months later, it gives me chills and a sort of PTSD vibe, I guess. I cannot handle screaming of any sort because of what happened, and I struggled so hard to open my eyes as I started to scream with whatever was screaming. As I opened my eyes and continued to scream, my fiancé is already screaming and running to the door. As he's reaching for the door and screaming, I noticed that the shaman show was still on, but the Mac keyboard was stuck and causing the show to sort of keep playing and stopping again non-stop. I looked at my fiancé and started screaming, "What the heck happened? What the heck was that? What was all that screaming?" And he replied with, "I don't know, I heard them too. I heard them screaming, I was in hell. I got up to save you and I thought you were dying with your roommate downstairs, and then outside of our bedroom door, we heard a gun cocking." My roommate was banging on the door and getting his gun ready for whatever the heck was happening behind our door. All I remember thinking was that this was all real, hell is real, and he's ready to end the hell that might be downstairs. Then I finally came to my senses as our roommate banged on our door one last time and said, "What the heck is going on? Are you guys okay? What's going on in there?" All I said was, "Do you have a gun? Why?" He replied with, "I thought someone broke into your room. I mean, all I heard was bloody murder screams." We all eventually calmed down and explained to our roommate that my fiancé and I had apparently had the same hell night terror, and that we were sorry for scaring him. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and neither did my fiancé. He described the screams, and he felt the room shake, and he felt the horror and the true meaning of hell with me that night. It took us a while to stop shaking and crying. We both came to an agreement that